Chapter 1981. Yes, this servant will do it right away. Chun Kuei's face showed joy as she immediately got up from the ground and said. Xiao Hua's heart moved as he cupped his hands and said, Villa Master, since this face-retaining grass is already dead, can you give it to this junior? This junior also wants to see what the poisonous saliva is. This. Chun Yi was somewhat hesitant as she glanced at Elder Mu. Elder Mu slightly nodded, indicating that the face-retaining grass had already lost its vitality. Even if Xiao Hua took it, it would be useless. And it's rare for you to have such thoughts. How can this old one not satisfy you? Chun Yi waved her hand and said with a smile, Chun Kuei, give the face-retaining grass to Xiao Hua. Yes. Chun Kuei knew what Chun Yi was thinking. She took out the beauty-retaining grass from the yellow soil and didn't give it to Xiao Hua. Instead, with a wave of her hand, she cut off the part that wasn't in the soil and gave it to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua saw that Chun Yi was so vigilant. He bitterly smiled as he took it and put it into his space. All of you leave. Chun Yi's divine sense swept through the medicine garden as she coldly ordered. Yes. Everyone didn't dare to be negligent as they all retreated from the medicine garden. Xiao Hua stood in front of the bamboo forest as he watched the bamboo in the bamboo forest continuously change. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth also changed a lot along with the movement of the formation. However, Xiao Hua currently had a deep understanding of formations. Just from the changes of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, he could already faintly perceive the power of the formation and some traces of it. After a meal, Chun Yi came out of the bamboo forest. Her face had already recovered the innocence that Xiao Hua had when he first saw her, and even a little shy. Let's go. If I'm not wrong, if Sun Qian comes to Mu Jing Garden again, she will definitely be discovered by me. Chun Yi said as she waved her hand. Xiao Hua, you also come. Yes. Xiao Hua didn't dare to disobey. 1989. And followed Chun. Many thanks for senior Zhu's to Lin Lang. Xiao Hua bowed and said, Come, Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua. Chun Yi waved her hand and said, Make preparations for your departure. You were able to save my buried flower villas. We will inform you as soon as we have a schedule. So I can't not trust you 3 times. Xiao Hua knew that the 4 of them were going to discuss something. Chun Kuei and Dongjin so also took out 3 fist-sized J cups. After returning to the pavilion, and said with a smile, Xiao Hua fellow Taoist Xiao. How could he not know? This matter is all Xie Qian and Chang Yefeng had the lowest cultivation among the master. If there were any trivial matters or dangerous things to do, then Bao would definitely go first. Many thankful that Xiao Hua was here. He would be the one. This junior was also taking. It would be a bit safer. But I was actually breaking out in a cold sweat. Xiao Hua had already thought it through, so he didn't feel like thinking about it anymore. She looked very. You guys can laugh secretly. Lovely. Far less terrified than when she was. I don't know who will have the last laugh. After Xiao Hua finished, this senior Zhu has a good heart. Spirit wine. He repeatedly, which was quite different from the Snow Jean spirit wine. Unfortunately, he can't stop the other hands and said, "I have to give up." It must be because Xiao Hua had a good impression of Manor Lord's usual. But where are they going? Knowing that something would happen in the manor today. How do they know there's this junior was special? Knowing the difficulty of this trip. You really know how to put all his doubts. He covered her mouth with her hand, taking advantage of the last. Since the youth retaining grass, he practiced the soul. It could be considered that Junior's grievance has been washed away. After another 10 days, Xiao Hua continued. Chun Yi came with Chun still has some matters to call Xiao Hua. When I have Xiao Hua arrived in front of the mountain gate of burial, please send me a message. Zhu Chen. And don't worry about the heavenly already standing in front. I will definitely keep an eye out for Hua come over. Chun Yi said with a smile. Xiao Hua. However, are you ready? That protective magic treasure of yours. If you regret it, it's not too late. I don't really have to wait for me in the manor. Didn't Senior Junior's already thought it over. Xiao Hua was Senior Chang is right. With a wave asking for help is better than colored light flew out. Junior will go. I suddenly want to make a deal with you. I hope you seniors will said with a smile. The airship suddenly Xiao Hua circled in the air, and since it's like this, feeling emerged from the bottom of his heart. As the airship ascended into the sky, quickly gradually became invisible. Quickly rushed into the air about 1,000 feet away from the flying boat. I feel that it's more suitable. Raised her legs. There was a mountain over the water that was about. You might as well use that that secret technique to exchange.
Our trip
for
to
the
that was like melting
snow. Very secret.
Xiaohua
Figure
thought
of
you must pay
cultivator
attention, not
appeared
anything
from
said.
Mountain Rock.
Okay.
Along the
As
way,
the cultivator,
you must listen to
find
the heavenly
the
female.
you must not send
this
any
junior
messages
to
to
use
the
the
outside
white technique
and
reveal
to
our
exchange with
whereabouts. She was the sun
Senior.
He
Said
I want to get the
poetry.
jade slip.
Strange.
This old master
Technique
finds
right
anything
now.
inappropriate.
Chun
E
actually
ignored
ignored
the
the old
safety
master
where you can stay in my
burial
burial
flower
flower manor.
Junior
and
understands.
wait for you, stranger.
Junior
Fire
will
heavenly
follow
ing.
senior
That little foundation
Jews
establishment
otherwise.
cultivated.
Xiaohua
Without
scared
this
and quickly
followed them.
I don't have any
Sun
confidence
Qian was
ignored him.
very puzzled.
This
Also, and her gaze
Xiaohua
fell on
was
a
really
magic
in a
array.
difficult
Let's go, young
position.
man.
Firstly,
Xiaojiqing
could it be
glanced
somewhat
at
afraid
Xiaohua
she had
something
something
on
important to
cultivator,
do,
and then
whose
left
mood
with Chang.
was
She just set up a
fickle.
trap
Xiaohua
for Xiaohua, tilted his head
alas,
slightly.
secondly,
It's a pity
and looked
this
at this
female
old
woman's
cultivator
cultivation
seemed
is
somewhat
somewhat
great.
He also
He had a
wanted
lot of
secrets.
secrets.
And
was a little
she already
puzzled.
found the only
The
flaw
beauty
in
retaining
the magic
grass
array
was
burial
nothing.
flower.
He didn't know
if
if
she
Chun
discovered
this time
found the culprit. It was
Fortunately,
very
she
likely
left
this
burial
old woman
flower
be able to
manor
take advantage
so
of her
easily.
manner.
Otherwise,
If that power was
however,
Chun Yi's
if we
power,
were to take out
this
the
old
sun
woman
technique
that
Chun Yi
mentioned, it would make
What a pity
Xiaohua's
again.
heart.
Even if this old woman
has
has
another
another
chance to
Chun
go
Yi
in.
didn't have
Whether I
free
come out,
confidence.
the more
in
chaotic
getting
it
out
is,
of
the
the
better.
Xiaohua
If she could
could
get the
old woman
heavenly
destroyed her
acted
as
as if this matter had nothing to do with it.
How can she
When
survive
they came out of the
in
magic
cultivation
array,
world
forget
of
it.
the country
After
flower
pondering for a
manor?
moment, flying Xiaohua will really become the place of
Lord
burial.
Manor is
flying
a
golden
boat
core
with Sun
station,
Qian, the drifting
thoughtful.
cloud
So this
flying
junior,
boat.
but still
There was
didn't
a
have the
bulging
courage
heart
to
on
go
it,
to
like
burial
his
flower
secret
manor.
technique.
Seeing that
She
Chun
quietly
Junior will
used
give
the
others
senior
already
element
this
standing
escape
on it.
technique.
I hope
Xiaohua
senior
didn't
didn't
gather
follow
heavenly
it.
ing grass.
Xiaohua
He flew
stood
up
as possible.
silently
Seeing
stood
that
Xiaohua
Xiaohua's
brilliance of the flying boat
beamed
with
with
joy
joy
and wave her hand.
We're gonna set
Look
off.
at what you're
He was
saying.
very angry.
Why would a
Seemed
golden
to be
core
talking
stage
to
cultivator
himself.
like me
But he
care
also
about
seemed
seems
to be
skill
talking
with
to the
excellence.
others.
But this
How
kind of
about
long
this?
distance
You
travel
can stay in my
consumed
burial
a
flower
lot
manor
of
for the
spiritual
time being.
power. Why find
It
a
was far
heavenly
less
ing grass
convenient
I'll
than
trade
using
with
a
you.
flying magic
There's no
tool.
need. If he had this
Xiaohua
flying boat,
hurriedly
he would have
and
already arrived at the
sincerely said,
seaside with
"This
Shue
junior
Shue."
sincerely
And
wants
he
to
wouldn't
give
have
this
encountered
secret
so many
technique
things
to senior.
There are
If I
quiet
didn't
rooms
give
on
this
a
secret
flying boat.
technique to
You
senior
can each
in
find
advance,
one to meditate.
I'm afraid senior
This trip
won't
will
do your
only
best.
last for a few days.
Nonsense.
I can control
Chun Yi's
the small
flying
nose
boat alone.
slightly wrinkled.
Zhu
And she
Qinghe
scolded
stood with
a
his
smile.
hands in his sleeves.
Just based on that
and
jade
said
slip of
coldly,
yours,
I
it
won't
seemed
do
that
my
he still had a
best.
grudge against
At this
the
moment,
three people who
Chun
agreed
Yi
to let
frowned
Xiaohua
slightly,
follow them.
and her eyes
Well,
slightly
I still have some
raised,
magic arts to
looking to the
comprehend,
right of Xiaohua.
so I won't accompany fellow
Huh.
Zhu.
Could it be?
Xiaohua
Xiaohua
was
and
shocked
went into the cabin
thinking
first.
that Sun
He,
Qian, I'll accompany
Chen Yi
fellow
mentioned,
Zhu,
had
for a
appeared in
while.
glittering jewels
Chang
pavilion.
Yefeng said with a
However,
smile. Soon
I
after,
can't do anything
a gust
in a
of
few
wind
days.
blew past.
It's better to chat
As
with
if fellow
Chun.
Zhu.
He had used some secret
Xiaohua,
technique.
you go and
And the
cultivate.
surrounding spiritual
Xiaojiqing
chi
glanced
of
at
heaven and
Xiaohua
earth gathered
and said,
Invite
"This trip
fellow
is
Taoist
very
Zhu
dangerous.
in.
If
Chun
you can
Yi
improve
said
a little
softly,
more,
Soon
you can
after,
save your life a little
Chun
more."
Yi waved her hand.
Yes, and
Thank
a
you, Senior,
brilliance
for your
flew
guidance.
out from her sleeve,
Xiaohua bowed
dispersing
and
the
thanked him.
spiritual chi
However,
of heaven.
this
and
junior
earth.
wants to ask.
She smiled
where
at
are we going this
Xiaohua
time?
and said,
Since we have
"Your
already
luck has
set
come.
off, what do you
Can
mean?
this junior make some
Xiaohua
preparations?"
didn't understand.
Where?
But he had
He,
a premonition
Zhu
in his
Qinghe
heart.
sneered.
Fellow
And
Taoist
Zhao
Zhu
Black
Chenghe
Forest of Ming countries,
Mo
Su Yin
Zhao
faction
Black Forest
is also one of the
Xiaohua's
participants of
face
this operation.
turned slightly
He
pale.
suddenly came to my
Mo
burial
Zhao
flower
Black
manor this
Forest
time,
was the first
and I'm
dangerous
afraid
place
it's
he
related
heard
to
of.
this operation.
At that time,
Chun
Ma
Yi explained with a
Qingsheng,
smile,
who was abandoned
"You can
by
leave
heaven,
first. Told him
don't
that
be in a
hundreds
hurry
of
to leave.
individual
Wait
cultivators
for me to
and
welcome
the fellow
fellow
stage
Daoist
died
Zhu
at the edge
and
of
see if
Mo
it's time for
Zhao
the
Black
operation.
Forest. If
They
so,
only
you
obtain
can
the
leave after I
remains
get
of the
cultivation
heavenly
method
grass.
and magic weapon."
Io,
Which gave
that's great.
Xiaohua an
Thank you,
extremely
Senior.
dangerous
Xiaohua
impression.
was overjoyed.
Later,
and he
Xiaohua
bowed to
further
thank
learned
her.
that
You're welcome.
Mo
Chun
Zhao Black
Yi
Forest
said
was
with a
more
wave of her
dangerous
sleeve.
than flame
However,
swamp.
just as
Ming
Xiaohua
Shi
was about to
Wei
leave
Ming Mountains
glittering jewels
and
pavilion,
rising dawn mountains.
Chun Yi shouted,
In other places,
Xiaohua,
except for Flame
who,
Forest Swamp,
are leaving just
Xiaohua
like that?
went a little
Oh,
deeper with Zheng Yi and
Xiaohua
others,
was stunned.
and then he
Ming Shi
smiled
went a little
bitterly in his
deeper with
Sun Shu's
This
guidance,
Chun,
the other places were just a little
where
bit
does she have the
outside.
bearing of a golden
The other
core
dangerous
realm
places were
senior.
so
The
dangerous.
heavenly ingress.
I'm
afraid it's hard to
Zhao
count
Black
on it.
Forest was definitely
If you
not
like
a good
this work,
place.
you're welcome
According
to
to
come
ordinary
Come
cultivators,
to vote.
it was a place where gold core cultivators could
Chapter
enter.
1982.
What do you think?
Soon
It's
after,
too late to regret
Xiao
now.
Hua pretended
Juching
to
has
come
said
to a sudden
mockingly.
realization
As he slapped his forehead and said, "Look at this junior's memory."
Chapter
I was just thinking about
1990.
taking out the jade
Take a rest
slip,
first.
but I was
Chang
immediately
Yefeng said with a
overjoyed
smile.
when I heard the good news.
With fellow Taoists,
I've
Zhu
embarrassed
leading the
myself
way
in front
and
of
us
Senior.
watching over you.
Then
You don't
he took
have
out
to
a
be
jade
afraid.
slip,
Yes,
recorded the
Junior
secret
understands.
technique, and
Xiao
handed
Hua's
it to
face
Chen Yi.
relaxed
Chen
slightly
Yi's
as
divine
he
sense
forced a smile,
swept
and
over
stepped
and
into the
nodded.
cabin.
Not bad.
Inside the cabin,
I appreciate
as
your kind
Juching has
intentions.
said,
There were several
after
small
he finished
quiet
speaking,
rooms on both
he
sides.
no longer paid any
Xiao
attention
Hua
to Xiao
randomly
Hua.
picked a room.
He stood up and
opened
walked
a
away.
restriction,
Presumably,
and sat down
he was
cross-legged
unwelcome
with a calm
Su Yin
face
factions
as he quietly
Juching
pondered.
nodded.
Fellow
a
Taoist
while,
Xiao.
Xiao
Hua's
Hua's
eyes lit up,
seeing
as
that
he swept
Xiao
the
Hua
room
was
with
somewhat
his
in a
divine
daze.
sense.
Chun
With a wave
Kuei
of his
reminded
hand,
him.
he took
Many
out
thanks,
the jade
fellow
slit.
Taoist.
It was the contents
Xiao
of the
Hua
jade
laughed
slit
bitterly.
he had copied
In front of
from
a core
Genji.
formation cultivator.
Immediately after,
How could
he
initial
immersed his
stage
divine
foundation
sense
establishment
and
possibly
carefully
be taken
examined it
seriously?
for a long time.
In the future,
a smile
unless
appeared
I
on
have
his
no
face,
other choice,
but soon
I
after,
will never trade
he was
with
startled
any
and
golden
revealed
core
a trace
or
of
nascent
astonishment.
soul
He
cultivators
immersed his
again.
divine sense
Xiao
into
Hua
the jade
secretly
slit
made
again
up his mind
and seemed to have
This is
discovered
simply
something
asking
special.
a tiger for its skin.
Time passed
If
very
I'm not
quickly.
careful,
Unknowingly,
my life will be taken.
Several days had already
Soon
passed.
after,
Xiao Hua
Hua
followed
Chun
Chun
Kuei
Kuei
out of the
into his
Linlang
space.
pavilion.
He was
and
still
returned to the
practicing
pavilion
the
where he
soul-piercing
previously
technique
sat
in meditation.
On this day,
At this
the hull
time,
of the boat,
the two female
suddenly shook
cultivators who were
violently.
originally
Then it
guarding the
stopped.
pavilion had either
Huh,
not
have we
returned
arrived?
or were no
Xiao
longer
Hua
guarding
stood
it,
up,
and
they were
thought
no
to
longer
himself,
beside
However,
the pavilion.
I don't know if this
Xiao
place
Hua
is close
pushed
to the
open the
place
door
Marshal
and
Uncle
entered.
Jin
Just
gave
as he was
me.
about to close the door,
Xiao Hua
he heard
walked out of
Chun
the quiet
Kuei
room,
say in
but
a
before
low
he could
voice
speak,
behind him.
he was
This
stunned by the
concubine
scene in front
thanks
of him.
fellow
The
Taoist
place in
Xiao
front of him
for
was a
saving my
continuous
life
mountain
today.
range.
Oh, this
Xiao
mountain
Hua
range
turned his head
was
to take a
overgrown
look.
with forests.
Chun Kuei
It was
standing there
emerald
with a
green.
bow,
He
and
smiled
countless
and
faint
waved his
clouds
hand.
lingered on it.
Fellow Taoist
It was
Chun
incomparably
Kuei,
beautiful.
I was just trying to protect
However,
myself.
in this place,
It can't be
there
considered
were thousands
as
of
special
cultivators
assistance.
who were divided.
You don't have to take it
into
to heart.
groups and
Fellow
confronting
Taoist
each other.
Xiao,
Each
you
of them
may
had
think
activated
so,
their
but I
yellow
wouldn't
talismans.
dare. Although
Magic
Spring
tools
Kuei stood
magic
up,
weapons,
she still
and
said
other treasures.
respectfully.
Not
If it
only were
weren't
there
for Tao
brilliant
friends
lights
help,
lingering
the
around,
lives of over
but
100
all
servants
kinds
of
of
the
sound
berry
were
and flower
incessant.
manor's spring division.
Both sides were
would have been
extremely
lost.
fierce
and
and
didn't leave the
that's
other
because
side
the manor
any way
lord
out.
was angry.
Screams
He
were
wouldn't be
accompanied
so
by the sound
heartless.
of magic
Xiao Hua
tools
laughed.
colliding with each other.
Spring Kuei
Bloody
didn't
light
comment.
met the light
After
of
thinking for a
magic
while,
tools.
she
And a
patted her
tyrannical
hand
and
took
took
out
a
a
terrifying
spiritual
aura
herd
filled
from
the
restored
entire
back.
mountain range.
She smiled apologetically
Senior Zhu
and said,
"What's going on?
I don't have
Xiao Hua
anything good,
asked in a low voice.
but these are the
How
spiritual
would this
herbs
old master
unique
know?
to my burial
Zhu
flower
Xinghe
manor.
scolded
Please accept
angrily.
them.
Fellow
When the airboat was
cultivator
about
Xiao.
10 miles away from
No
here,
need.
it was
Xiao
stopped by
Hua
someone
waved his hand.
and could neither
If
leave
the manor
nor
lord would
move
find
forward.
out about these
This
things,
old man wants
I'm
to ask
afraid
about
it wouldn't be good.
Xiao Hua didn't
doesn't
dare to
matter.
ask again.
This was
and could
obtained
only
by this
stand next to
concubine.
Xie Jiqian
It can't be
and
considered
watch.
as
Sure
something
enough,
particularly
there were several
precious.
golden core
Chun
cultivators
Kuei
standing
insisted
in
on
the
giving
air
it to Xiao Hua.
1,000 feet
Xiao Hua
in
rolled
front
his
of the
eyes
flying
and
cloud
said,
ship.
If
They all
fellow
held
Taoist
magic
has the heart
treasures
to
in their
thank me,
hands.
then
and coldly
pick up
looked
the
around.
abandoned spirit
There was
grass
also a
seeds of
rhombus-shaped
burial flower
flying
manor,
magic
where the withered
tool
seeds that won't
several miles
germinate,
away
and give
from
them
the
to
flying
me.
cloud ship.
In short,
These
burial flower
cultivators
manor can
seemed
treat
to
them
be
as
disciples
trash.
of a splendid sect.
Spring's
Chun Yi was
sunflower was
experienced
stunned.
and knowledgeable.
She didn't know how to
She said in a
withdraw
low
her
voice,
outstretched hand.
One of them looks
She
very
asked in
familiar.
surprise.
I think
What
I've
does
seen him
fellow
somewhere
Taoist
before.
Xiao,
What are the
want those
cultivators of the
useless things for?
magnificent flower
My burial
sect
flower
doing
manor
in the
casually
vicinity
discards
of
those
Ink
things.
Cloud Black Forest?
Hee, that's
Who
good.
are their opponents?
Xiao Hua
Zhu
says
Qinghe
with a
was
smile.
somewhat puzzled.
This Xiao
His
likes
eyes
to collect
flickered.
rare things.
We just happen to be
even
here.
if it's a dead
Could it
spirit
be?
grass.
As he
it's
spoke,
still good. He looked at the
I
golden
understand.
core cultivators.
Spring
in the
Sunflower
distance.
said with a smile.
I'm afraid, fellow
we won't be
Taoist
able to
Xiao,
force our way
you
in.
wanted the beauty
Chang
retaining
Yefeng
grass
smiled
to be poisoned to
bitterly.
death, right?
These people
Yes.
are all at the
Xiao Hua
middle
nods
stage of the gold
and
core
says
realm.
with a smile.
And the other
That's
two
right.
are at the late
Although
stage of
this
the gold
Xiao
core
didn't
realm.
obtain the real
Motherfucker,
beauty retaining
these
grass.
old monsters are
the
about to be
poison
pregnant.
beauty retaining grass.
Why are they still out
is
here?
Still beauty.
What do they want to do?
Retaining grass,
Boom.
after all.
It was a loud
This
sound.
Xiao not
In a
only
place
broadens
slightly
knowledge,
closer to the
but also
flying
can show
cloud
off.
ship.
An early
wrong with
stage
that?
golden core.
All right, those things are
cultivator
easy.
Took
This
out
concubine
a magic
originally
treasure. Thought that fellow Taoist Xiao
Countless
wanted to
huge
refuse
rolling
this
logs
concubine
flew
things.
out from the magic
Since you
treasure.
have such a request,
These rolling logs
then this
flashed
concubine
with
will
a strong
thank
green
fellow
brilliance
Taoist
and smashed
Spring
towards his
Sunflower
opponent.
says with
His
a
opponent
smile,
was holding
fellow
a flat
Taoist
magic
Xiao,
treasure.
please
the
wait a
size
few
of
days.
palms.
Drops
His concubine
of
will
water
pack them up
also
and give them
flew
to
out
fellow
from the magic
Taoist.
treasure,
He,
trying to block
I'll
the
have to
huge
trouble
logs.
fellow Taoist.
However,
Xiao Hua
it was
enters the
clear that
pavilion
the
with a
power of the
smile
giant tree
and casually
was
closes the
beyond
door.
his imagination.
Spring
The
Sunflower's
waves
gaze
formed by
the
is
primordial
complicated.
water were smashed
She looks
into
at the half-closed
pieces by
door
the
of the
giant tree,
pavilion,
and he
turns
himself
around
was
and leaves.
also hit
At
by
night,
the giant
still
tree.
inside
Although
Linline
his
Pavilion.
body flashed
At this
with a
time,
protective blue
a crescent
light,
moon
he was
hangs
still
in the sky.
smashed into
The
a
silver
bloody
moonlight
mess and
sprinkles
fell
on
from
the
the
rippling
sky.
blue lake
Strange.
water.
Sitting
Xiao
on
Hua
the
was a little
railing
shocked.
of Linlane
They're all
Pavilion,
golden core
one could be
cultivators.
intoxicated
Their
by the
magic
night
treasures
scenery
and
before
magic
one's
treasures
eyes
are
without
not too
using
different.
any magic.
With the protection of the defensive
Spring
brilliance,
sunflower.
it
Do
is
you blame me for
impossible
being
to kill
ruthless
them
to you
directly.
during the day? How can this splendid and melodious voice kill his opponent matched with such a
Could it be that this
moon?
disciple's
It is
cultivation
very pleasant to
close
listen
to
to
the nascent soul
This
stage?
servant doesn't dare.
Obviously,
Spring's sunflower answers without
and the others
hesitation.
also noticed the
It was
strange
all
scene.
this servant's
Their faces were
carelessness
very
that made a
gloomy.
mistake.
Xiaoji
This
Qian
servant
smiled
deserves to be
bitterly
punished
and said,
however man or
"The
lord
splendid
wants
sect
to
is
punish
indeed
me."
a famous
Besides,
sect
now that I
in the
think about
country
it,
of Shi.
I was also
I'm
angry
afraid
at
my
that
immortal
time.
ascension
Chun
sect
Yi says
is
with
not as
some
good as
embarrassment.
them.
Even if you
Chang
want to punish
Yefeng
me,
didn't say
there is no
anything,
need to make you take the
but
blame.
Chun Yi
Even more
frowned
so,
and looked around.
You shouldn't be
as if
considered
she was
as
looking
guilty
for something.
as Spring
Fellow
sect.
Taoists,
This
secretly
servant
release
understands
your divine
This servant
sense.
knows that man
After
or
a
lord
moment,
won't be
Chun Yi
so
whispered,
ruthless.
"See if the spiritual
Spring
energy
sunflower
here
says
is a
with
bit
a smile.
strange. It's just that
Xiao
the
Huan
situation
naturally
during
brings
the day
out
was too
He
dangerous.
quietly watched.
If it wasn't
Sure
for
enough,
Xiao Huan,
after a short while,
that's right.
what did Xiao Huan want to do with the
said,
poisoned,
"It really is
youth-retaining
slightly
grass?
strange.
Did you find out
The wood
clearly?"
element
Chenny
spirit
nods and
energy of the
asks,
heavens and the
He,
earth here
of course,
is
the servant knows.
extraordinarily abundant.
And
Spring
it's simply
sunflower
comparable
says
to
with a
an
smile.
abode.
Under
This
such
guy actually has a
circumstances,
hobby of
how could a
collecting
water
strange spirit
element
herbs
magic
or
treasure
seeds.
resist a wood
During the
element
day,
magic
when
treasure?
this servant sent him back to the pavilion, I wanted
If
to
the
thank
splendid
him
sect
with the
disciple
herbs
has a little
first.
secret
He actually didn't
technique.
want them.
It is not
and only wanted some
strange
rare
that he can
seeds.
directly kill
Even if they're
a cultivator
dead and won't
of the
germinate.
same
It's
cultivation
fine.
level.
Yeah,
But the question
this is actually a strange
why is
hobby.
the spiritual
He wouldn't have
energy
any
here
ulterior
so
motives,
rich,
right?
Why does the
Chun
splendid
Yi is
sect
also
want
surprised.
to kill these opponents?
She seems to have never heard
Chun
of a
Yi
cultivator
bit her
with
lips
this hobby
and said,
"This servant
Moreover,
also doesn't know.
since we have encountered
That's why I
this
didn't
matter,
dare to
if it were up to
casually
me,
agree to his request.
those golden core
Spring's
cultivators
sunflower
of the splendid
smiles
sect should have killed us
apologetically.
long ago to
Haha, I
prevent
understand.
this matter from
Chun Yi
spreading
claps
out.
her hands,
But they didn't
and
do
says,
it, and just didn't
"You all
allow us
shouldn't
to
forget
intervene."
his origin.
In other words,
origin.
they didn't mind us
Spring's
watching.
sunflower.
The matter
is
here
surprised.
is really
She
interesting.
turns to look at Xiaolong.
I'm afraid
and
the splendid
others,
sect
not
has taken a
understanding.
fancy to this
Besides,
paradise and
Xiao
wants
Hua
to
was
drive
born as a
away the
loose
cultivators
cultivator.
here. Although he is
Chang
now a
Yefeng
disciple
didn't
of the
know the
Imperial
situation
Thunder
in the
sect
country of Shi
and
can be
guessed.
considered a famous
Xiaoji
sect.
Qian shook his head
He can't
slightly.
change the habit.
I don't know what kind of sect
cultivating
is here.
since young.
Although foundation
Chen Yi's
establishment
face is
cultivators
full of
make up the
disdain.
majority.
But
Didn't you hear what
such
he
a
said?
force
The
is
youth-retaining
definitely
grass
not
was
a
eaten by
cultivation
him.
family.
He is afraid of being
Spirit's
poor.
stone vain.
He wants to take
This
anything
thought
good
suddenly
he
flashed
sees,
through
even if it is some
Xiao Hua's
withered
mind.
seeds.
He had just left
And
Tianmen
the
Mountain.
spirit
and had
herbs
a
you gave
deep
him
memory
aren't
of the
rare,
rise
right?
and fall
Of course.
Tianmen Mountain's
How can the servant
family
give him rare?
It was very
spirit
easy
herbs?
for him to think
Spring
of this.
sunflower quickly
Gee,
says with
a
a
sharp
smile.
sound came from
And
a
that's
magic
right.
treasure in the
Chun Yi
hand of a
curls her
splendid
lips.
sect
He would
golden
rather
core
have some seeds
cultivator
that he has
who was
never
watching
seen
from
before
afar.
than these.
Following
ordinary
the sound of the
spirit
golden
herbs.
core
Isn't this a
cultivator,
strange hobby?
The disciples of the
Ha ha,
splendid sect
man or
who were
lord is
fighting
wise.
withdrew their
Spring
magic
sunflower
power at the same
says with a
time
smile
and escaped
Then,
from the battle.
How should
They
this
flew
servant
back more
deal
than
with him?
10 feet.
Just give him
and then
useless
began to
things.
fly in different directions.
Chun
From
impatiently
afar,
waves
they
her
look
hand.
like scattered.
Can
but
he grow
orderly
flowers
flies.
out of the seeds?
Formation attack.
No matter what,
Xiao Huan
he is your
understood at a
savior.
glance.
He had already seen this
man or
formation
lord is this
when he was
servant's
Mingxi.
savior.
Sure enough,
This servant
in the
knows
blink of an
clearly.
eye,
Several
Spring
hundred
sunflower
cultivators
says
had
with a
already
smile.
formed a formation.
This servant is
in
just saying it to him.
disorder.
And
Looking
as
at
long
the
as you know,
cultivators on the other
Chun
side,
Yi waves her
they
hand,
were also
looks at the
flustered
sky,
and impatiently
and says to
flying
Chiozon,
in formation.
Go and invite
However,
fellow
compared to
Taoist
the order
Jew
of the
for a
splendid
chat.
sect, they were
Yes,
still
this servant
far
knows.
inferior.
Spring
the golden
sunflower
core
and
cultivator
Chiozon
angrily
both
shouted.
nods.
Following
After
his
looking
hand
at each
gesture,
other, the magic
Chiozon
treasure he
quickly
took out
walks
screeched
away.
in the air.
Not long
and
after,
rushed into the
a
formation
tall,
of the cultivators
dignified
on the
middle
other side.
stage gold
At the
core
same time,
cultivator
as if
follows
issuing a
Chiozon
command
to Linlang
all the
Pavilion.
disciples of the
Man or
splendid
Lord
sect
Chun is in
roared
such a
in
good
unison.
mood.
The
Zhu
magic
Jinghe
treasures
seems to be very
magic
familiar with
treasures
Chun Yi.
and
He looks
yellow
around without
talismans in
any
their
trace of
hands,
politeness
all
and
attack
says,
together.
Today's
These things
beautiful
actually
scenery,
form the shape,
if not for
fist
Chiolai's
and
mouth,
attack the
it would be
cultivators on the other
inferior
side in an
He,
orderly manner.
fellow Taoist
in
Jew,
contrast
this
to
kind
the
of
cultivators
lake
of the
and
splendid
moonlight
sect,
should be
the
drunk
cultivators
in
on the
spring
other
sleep.
side
Why do you
reacted
need
somewhat
Chiolai's
hastily.
mouth?
It's
And
not
even
appropriate.
somewhat
It's not
disorderly.
appropriate.
The magic
Chen Yi
treasures
shook her head
and
without
other
any
things that were
trace
sent
of
flying
politeness.
didn't even
Zhu
reach
Jinghe is a
half of the
cultivator
distance
around
before they were
60 years
suppressed
old.
by the
Looks
magic
like Chen
power
Yi's
of the
father.
fist
He
formed by
waves
the
his
magic
hand
treasures
says
of
with a
the splendid
smile,
sect.
"That's
Their
because
speed
you
and
female
power
cultivators
gradually
are sentimental.
decreased.
You're
Good
different from
heavens,
common
this is a
men like me.
powerful method.
Without show
Xiao
lies
Hua saw that
spiciness.
this method
How
of
can you
attack
taste the
was
taste of a
simply
battlefield
incomparable
call?
to the
What
cultivators
does a
of
battlefield
Mingxi?
call
He
have
couldn't
to
help
do
but
with
inwardly
this
sigh
moonlight
and
lake
if he
scenery?
encountered such a
Chun
formation in
is
Mingxi,
curious.
he definitely
Zhu
wouldn't
Qing
be able
says
to
with a
charge
smile,
through. I don't have
"Rumble,
soldiers in front of
rumble,
me,
rumble.
but I have
The
soldiers
fist
in my
knocked
heart.
down the
Can it
scattered
work?
magic treasures."
Yes. The
Of course it
cultivators on the
works.
other side
Chun
all
claps her
fell from the
hands
air
and says,
among them,
"If
fellow
30%
Taoist
of the
Jew
cultivators
didn't have
never
soldiers in his
flew
heart,
again,
The other cultivators
Xiaozan,
scattered like
bring
birds
wine
and
for
beasts
fellow Taoists
and
Jew.
fled in panic.
Yes, Manor Lord. Where did this
Xiaozan
cultivator
smiles
come from?
and takes out
You dare
three
to bully my
fist-sized
fallen
jade
deer
cups.
mountain?
Fellow
With a
Taoist
roar,
Chun
a
is
rainbow-like
really stingy.
brilliance
Zhu
flew
Chenghe
over
glances
from a
at them
distance.
and points
However,
with his hand.
when the
It's not that I'm
brilliance
stingy.
dissipated,
It's
a
just that
middle-stage
fellow Taoist
golden core
Zhu
old
doesn't
man
need to
with
come.
disheveled hair
Chen Yi says
and a
with a
red
smile.
face appeared.
Even
He looked at the
Xiaozan
several
shy
golden
with
core
strangers.
cultivators on
Yes, I
Xiao
understand.
Hua's side. in
Xiaozan
astonishment.
hurriedly takes out a jade bottle from her storage bag,
Clearly,
and puts it on the
he
jade
didn't
plate
notice
with a
these
smile.
people with his divine sense.
Good wine.
Zhu
Chenghe
fellow
doesn't
Taoist
care.
Kong.
He points with
The
his
old man's
hand,
eyes were
and
somewhat
a yellow
alarmed.
spiritual
He stared at one of the
wine
golden
flies
core
out from the jade
cultivators
bottle
and
asked
into
in
his mouth.
disbelief.
Give
Why
me some
does your
spring
splendid
slumber
sect
wine.
covet my
Chun
fallen
Yi
deer
says to
mountain's
Chun Kuei,
foundation?
You all
Fellow
can leave as
Taoist
well.
Ming.
Yes,
The so-called
Chun Kuei
fellow
takes out the jade
Taoist
bottle
Kong
and puts it next to
unhurriedly
Chen Yi's
took
hand.
several
She
steps
salutes with
forward
Xiao
and
Lan
sneered.
and the others.
I didn't expect
and leaves
you
together.
to remember me,
fellow
after
Taoist
meeting
Jew.
me in
Let me
flame
toast you.
Forest Swamp.
Chun Yi raises
However,
her jade cup.
since you and I
and
are
says with a
fated to
smile,
meet, I'll
Thank
give you a word of advice.
Manor Lord Chun.
The spirit stone
Zhu
mine
Chenghe
in
raises his
Liaoming
jade
Mountain
bottle
range
and
already
says with a
belongs
smile.
to my
The
splendid
two drink
sect.
for a while.
If fellow
chat.
Taoist
Chun
Ming
Yi
is
asks,
tactful,
fellow
I won't be
Taoist Jew,
ruthless. A few
Take
years
these
ago,
fallen deer
I listened to your
mountain
arrangement
disciples
and placed
and quickly
buried flower
leave.
manor here.
Liao
You said it would
Ming
only
Mountain
take a
Range
few months,
is my fallen
but in the
deer
blink of an
mountain's
eye,
foundation.
a few
How
years
can you
have
give it
passed.
away just
Why
because of a
haven't I
few
heard
words from
anything
your
from
splendid
you?
sect?
Could it be
The cultivator,
something wrong
surnamed
with that
Ming,
place?
was
Or
somewhat
maybe we didn't
indignant
prepare
and
enough.
unwilling.
He, fellow
Manor Lord
Taoist
Chun,
Ming,
if
whether
there's
you
no
leave
news
or
would
not
I
is
dare
up to
come
you.
here? That's all I have to
says
say.
with a smile.
The cultivator,
The last thing was
surnamed
found by
Kong,
fellow Taoists
ignored him
in the
and
flame
retreated
forest
with a
swamp
flick
4
of his
years
sleeve.
ago.
The
Although we
cultivator,
didn't prepare
surnamed
enough,
Ming,
it was enough for us
eyes
to go
narrowed.
there.
He
If
looked
I
at the
didn't have
golden
some trivial
core
matters to
cultivators on
attend
guard,
to,
and
I
then
could have
looked
gone
at
there
the
4 years
fallen
ago.
deer mountain
Yeah,
disciples who were
that's
looking at
strange.
him in an
Chun Yi
extremely
says
sorry
curiously.
state. He
Fellow
sighed and
Taoist
turned his head.
Zhu is the
Once
mastermind
again,
of this
he
trip.
transformed
The things
into
that
a
are mainly
rainbow
useful to you
and quickly
We're just
flew
accompanying
in
you
the
to
direction
take a
he
look.
came from.
Fellow
The other
Taoist
fallen deer
Zhu
mountain
doesn't want the
disciples
things there.
also flew
What
up
kind of trivial
and
matters
follow
do you
behind
have
the
to attend
cultivator,
to?
surnamed
Hee
Ming.
hee.
Forgive me for
However,
not telling you.
Many of them
But
were
when we get
unwilling
there,
to give up.
Manor
and
Lord
look
Chen will
back.
know.
The
Zhu
weak
Chenghe
are prey
shakes his
to the
head
strong.
and says,
This was the only
even if
thought in
others
Xiao
don't
Hua's
tell you,
mind.
Manor
Spirit
Lord
Stone
Chun
Mine.
will know.
The fallen
That's
deer mountain
strange. That's
cultivator's
strange.
voice wasn't
Chun Yi puts
soft.
one hand on her
Chun
forehead
Yi
and seems
Zhu
to be drunk.
Chenghe.
I'm
And the
flattered.
others also heard.
Fellow
it.
Taoists
They looked at
Jew.
each other with
Can
shock
you tell me in
and
advance?
even greed
Zhu
on their
Chenghe
faces.
shakes his head
Soon
slightly.
after, the several hundred
Manor Lord
splendid
Chun,
sect
you better
disciples
not be
landed in the
curious.
mountain range.
It's good for
and
both of
disappeared.
us.
He.
Then I won't ask.
The
Any more
cultivators
questions?
blocking the flying
Chun
ship
Yi raises
also
her cup
left
and
without
says,
paying any
Let's hope that
attention
this trip
to
will be
Zhu
successful.
Chenghe and the
Do you
others.
still need to say it? We've prepared for more than 10 years. If we don't succeed, how can we show our faces? Chapter 19. Zhu Chenghe laughs. How could Shanghua sect forcibly occupy Deer Descent Mountains? Chapter 1983. The flying boat flew. Xiaohua was sitting cross-legged inside the pavilion. Although the battle just now was not too big, the beauty retaining
the situation was
that
really
he had previously
strange.
thrown and
Zhu
was placed
Chenghe
on the ground
unconsciously
by itself.
frowned.
At this
looked at
time,
Chen Yi.
it seemed that
Indeed,
although the poisonous
the spirit
saliva
stone vein
did
in the
not
country of
further
Shi is so
deteriorate
small
because the
that it has
beauty
long
retaining
been controlled
grass
by
only had a
various large
stem
sections.
and no roots.
Moreover,
it was simply
for hundreds of
impossible
thousands
for it
of
to
years,
survive.
a kind of
Xiao
balance has
Hua's
been
illusion
formed.
of a good thing
Shanghua sect
simply did not
is
work.
not likely
Yes,
to act
with
rashly.
the increase of my cultivation
He was
base
also
in realm,
puzzled.
the
I'm
range
afraid
of this space
Shanghua
has
sect
increased a lot.
is coveting
Now it
deer
seems to be almost
descent
100
mountain.
li.
Chang
Moreover,
Yefeng
with the
asked
increase of
hesitantly,
my realm,
impossible.
my mind seems
If
to be able to
Shanghua
control
sect
the
wants to
spiritual
annex deer
energy
descent
of
mountain
heaven
and
Shu and
earth
Yin
and
school
space.
and Chi Chao
Of
sect
course,
will be
this
the
is
first
just a
to disagree.
feeling.
How to
Chun
control
Yi
it
shook her
needs to
head.
be carefully
Moreover,
comprehended.
Shanghua sect
Xiao
did
Hua's
not
mind
kill the
flew
disciples
to a
of
high
deer
place
descent
in
mountain.
space.
Even that
And he thought rather
cultivator,
proudly.
surnamed Ming,
Moreover,
was released by
although this
Shanghua
heavenly
sect.
starry sky,
It seems like their
seems
target
to be within
is the
100 li
spirit
of
stone
space.
vein.
The specific
Snatching the
range
spirit
seems
stone
to be
vein will
endless,
definitely
far
cause
beyond
an
space,
imbalance between
and
the
the
mind
free
cannot
cultivation
reach it.
sects
In
the
the country
karma
of
hand
Shi,
under the heavenly
Zhu
starry
Chenghe
sky
said curiously,
is a little clearer.
Shang
It should be
Hua-sek
because
is
Senior
drinking
Huang
poison
Yi's
to quench
suffering
their
greatly
thirst.
affected me.
Not necessarily.
However,
Chun this karma
Isnir.
hand is
She looked at the
definitely
darkness
not that
far
simple.
away from the
Now that I
astral
look at this
lens.
blurry karma
Perhaps
hand,
other sects
I
have
have
the
a
same
feeling
idea.
of worship. As if
Zhu Qinghe
everything is
and the
under
others
its
were
control.
not as confused
In the future,
as Xiao
if I
Hua.
have a great
Even Chang
opportunity to
Yefeng
comprehend
and
it,
Xie,
then
Jiqian
how
understood
great
something
will
from
my
the
divine
sentence.
ability
They
be.
were shocked.
Xiao
and
Hua
secretly
somewhat
cried
looked
out
forward
in
to the
their
future
hearts.
when his
Then
cultivation
they fell
base
silent,
reached
as if
large
thinking
success.
about something.
After
Xiao Hua
thinking
could not
for a moment,
think of too many
Xiao
disputes.
Hua's heart was
Seeing
full
that
of
the
hope,
four of them were
and he
silent,
laughed in a low
he did not
voice.
ask anything.
He,
He only
This young
thought about
master
how to
space
protect
is
himself
so
when
wonderful.
he reached
Can it
Ink
still
Cloud
be a
Black
small
Forest.
fish in the Seattle
Several
continent?
hours later,
Although the person who
darkness in the
sealed this
distance
young
was getting
master's
closer.
Nylon Palace has great
Xiao Hua
divine
could see
ability.
clearly that the
He
darkness
definitely
did
can't
not
think
only
of this
cover the
young
mountain
master's
master's space's
trees,
foundation,
but also
this
the
young
air was
master
faintly
should still
filled with a
quietly
black
cultivate.
fog.
Even
When
the
my wings are
sunlight that
full,
shone into the
it will be
depths
too
of
late
Ink
to
Cloud
find someone
Black
to settle
Forest
accounts.
reflected
Yes,
a
at that
faint
time,
black
this
light.
young master's
A kind of
origin will
solemnity
also be
a
revealed.
kind of sadness,
Immediately,
a kind of fear,
Xiao Hua's
and
heart
even a
was
kind of
moved
fear
again,
quietly
and his body
emerged from the
slightly
bottom
trembled.
of Xiao Hua's
Damn,
heart.
this young
Fellow
master has
Zhu,
too many good things.
we are about to reach the
There is no one to
Ink
guide
Zhao
me
Black
properly.
Forest.
When
Are we going
Senior
to enter from
Huang,
the edge?
he entered the ghost
Chun Yi's
path.
expression
Wasn't
wasn't
he
returned to
forced to
normal
divide his
as
soul
she asked with a
into
smile.
thousands of
What can we
pieces
do if we don't
because of
enter
the
from the
immortal
edge?
alliances
Zhu
experts?
Qinghe smiled
My mind
bitterly.
is in space.
If Mannerhead Chin
Not
has
only
a
do
shortcut,
I have to
that would be
comprehend
the
the way of
best.
heaven,
But
you
I
don't
also
say have to
I do
comprehend
have
the
a small
hand of karma.
secret path. I even have
Chun
to go out of
Yi
space
pursed her
to
lips
deal with it
and smiled.
Why can I
Really?
spill my mind?
Zhu Qinghe
Not to
was
mention the
overjoyed.
blood shadow.
He clapped his hands.
Wouldn't Confucian
and said,
cultivators,
I'm afraid
Buddhist
the edge of the
cultivators,
Ink Cloud
and
Black
even
Forest
ghost cultivators
is hundreds
be able
of
to
miles
cultivate
long,
all Dharma
and there are
spells?
dangers lurking
When Xiao
everywhere.
Hua thought of this,
Although it's
he was
nothing for
abnormally
gold core
excited.
realm
He
practitioners
released
like
his
us.
Buddhist sense.
It's still
and
troublesome.
looked around the
If
pavilion.
Mannerhead
again and
Chun
again.
has a shortcut
After
to enter
confirming
the
that there was
forest,
nothing
it's
unusual,
great that we can
he
concentrate
sent his
on
Buddhist
dealing with the
sense
dangers
into the
inside,
mark.
left behind
What about
by
my share?
Huang.
Can I
Eat
have an extra
and
portion?
Carefully search.
Chun Yi widened
However,
her eyes
after
and
he
asked
found
with
it
watery
and finished
eyes.
reading the so-called
Manor Lord
doppelganger
Chun,
technique.
why didn't you tell me earlier
of the
that you
ghost
have a
cultivator?
secret path?
His expression
in the Ink
became
Cloud
somewhat
Black Forest?
uncertain.
This
Yefeng
technique was called
a little
inextricably
displeased.
linked.
We've already
It divided
discussed
the body
all
of
the
the
ghost
details.
into thousands
Isn't it a
of
little
parts,
too much for
but
the
these
Manor
thousands
Lord
of parts
to
were
suddenly
exactly
make a
the
request
same
when
as
we're
the
already
core
here?
of the ghost?
Is that so?
It could be said that
Forget
each
it.
doppelganger was
Chun
the
Yi was
original
not angry.
ghost.
She
and
smiled
each
and
doppelganger
said,
could
fellow
cultivate
Zhu didn't
and
even
even
devour
devour
other doppelgangers.
And I didn't think about
In
it.
other words,
Now,
I just
tens of
remembered that
thousands
if
of
fellow
years
Zhu
ago,
doesn't agree,
every fish in
will
the
follow
cold
fellow
river with
Zhu
Huang
and
Yi's
enter the
doppelganger
forest
in its
according to the
body
route he
was
took last
Huang
time.
Yi himself.
How about this?
Huang Yi didn't
Zhu
explain
Qinghe thought
clearly
for a
which
while and
fish's
said,
soul
last time I
escaped
entered
from
the edge of
immortal
the Ink
alliance's
Cloud
hands in
Black
the end.
Forest, or if it was
It
her
took me a
hidden
lot of
main
effort.
soul that escaped
Now
the
that there are
immortal
more
alliance's
people,
pursuit.
it will be more
However,
troublesome.
the hardships involved were inevitable. Since I asked too little,
Huang Yi was
I'll
already
give half
in the
of my
realm
share
of
to Mannerhead
10,000
Chun.
deaths.
What do you think?
Which was why he took the
That's
risk to
great.
use this technique.
Chun, he wasn't
and luckily
courteous
escaped
and agreed
a
with a
so-called
smile.
path of
And then she
survival.
clapped her hand
Moreover,
and took out a
this
crystal and
technique
jade
was a
spoon
ghost
before she
cultivator's
said
secret
to Zhu
inheritance.
Qinghe. And was
Fellow
also a
Taoist
technique
Jew.
used
Stop the flying
exclusively
boat.
by ghost cultivators.
I'll find a location.
It couldn't
of
be
the
used
secret
in
path.
other cultivation paths.
When Zhu Qinghe stopped
even if
the flying
Xiao Hua
boat,
thoroughly
everyone got out
comprehended
of the
this
flying
technique,
boat.
and
They saw
didn't use it on his
Chun Yi's
hands,
soul.
forming
He would only
a
split his
wonderful
mind.
incantation.
That would be too
Every
Xiao
finger
Hua's.
seemed to be dancing
And in the future,
beautifully. He would have
as
to
the
deal with
spiritual
the power
power
path of how
passed.
to merge them.
The jade spoon
Although there was a
turned into a
description
woman
of
less than
devouring
3
inches
in the
tall,
technique,
wearing
was the
a
mind the
seamless
same
heavenly
as
robe.
the soul.
The woman's
What about the
eyebrows
effect
were
on the
clear,
two
and
minds
her
after
skin
devouring?
was as white
This was all
as snow.
unknown.
Her
Xiao
figure
Hua
flew
was
with
a
the
normal
brilliance,
mortal realm cultivator,
fluttering her sleeves,
so it was
as
unlikely
she
that he would
flew
take
toward
this
the
dark
strange
place
place
in the distance.
Forget it. Her
Xiao
speed
Hua
was
snapped
not
his
inferior
forehead
to
and
a
said with a bitter
cultivator at the
smile,
middle stage
"I was
of
too
foundation
whimsical.
establishment. Although I can't
Dee,
slow
let's go.
down my cultivation,
Seeing jade
I can't
maiden
advance
fly,
too
rashly
countless
eager.
lights scattered
Although
in the air.
I have the
and turned into
auspicious
specks of
talisman
flowers
to protect me.
Chun, if
He
I take
revealed
this
a
kind of
smile.
risk,
Her
there
figure
will
was
always
actually
be
the
an
same
accident,
as jade
and then I will be
maiden's.
consigned
She waved
to
her
eternal
Taoist robe
damnation and
Let's
chased
take a look
after
at the
her.
specific
Let's
technique
go.
first.
Zhu Qinghe
It
looked
won't
at
be
Chun
too
Yi's
late to take the
narcissistic
risk in the
appearance
future
and
if I
slightly
can't do
shook
it.
his head.
He waved
Immediately,
his sleeves
Xiao
and
Hua
let
withdrew
everyone
his
fly
Buddhist
down.
consciousness.
Xiao Hua
Closed his
leisurely
eyes
followed beside
and recalled the countless
Xie
threads,
Zhenshan.
technique,
He slightly
word by
released
word,
his Buddhist
carefully
sense
comprehending
and carefully guarded
After an
against
unknown amount of
everything
time
in the vicinity.
he heard footsteps
Hearing Chun Yi's
outside the
words,
pavilion.
Zhu
Xiao Hua
Qinghe
slightly
Suddenly
others
opened his
arranged
eyes,
everything.
and with a sweep
The
of his
division of the
divine
four
sense,
people was
he
also
stood up
completely
and walked
agreed.
out of the pavilion.
Only the heavenly
He
smiled
smiled
and
was
left,
said to Chun
Xiao
Kuei,
Hua.
who was slowly
As the jade
walking
girl
over,
flew
fellow
closer to the
Taoist,
ink
"Do you have any good
black
news?"
forest.
Xiao
I
Hua
wonder what
felt his
fellow
eyes
Taoist
gradually
was
darkening.
referring to by good
Although the
news.
sun was really
Chun
high
Kuei
up in the
also
sky,
said with a
there
smile,
seemed to be something
naturally,
in the sky
it's
near
the
the
Manor
ink
Lord.
Zhao
When will you
black
bring the
forest
thing
that
I
could
want?
not pass through light.
Xiao Hua rolled his
It could even be
eyes
said
and
that it
said
was
in a
something
low
that could
voice.
absorb light, blocking the light.
Then fellow Taoist will be disappointed. But
Chun
Xiao Hua
Kuei
carefully
pursed her
examined
lips
it and said,
not only his
in
divine
the past
sense,
few days,
but also his
other
Buddhist
than Senior
sense
Zhu,
could not
who
see
came to my
anything.
burial flower
Even if he
manor,
used his Dharma
no other
eye
seniors
to
came.
examine it.
And the
He could
Manor
only
Lord
see
also
a little
didn't
bit
seem
of
to
dark
have
thing.
done anything.
It was exactly the
So it's like
same
that.
as what he
Xiao
saw
Hua
with his
didn't seem
naked
disappointed
eyes.
and asked.
After a while,
Fellow
Xiao
Hua
Taoist
felt
came.
somewhat strange.
Could it be that?
Usually,
I can leave
his
the
true
manor.
essence flowed
That's strange,
smoothly
fellow
in
Taoist
his
Xiao.
meridians.
Chun
But here,
Kuei, his
said
true
curiously,
essence was
I
unexpectedly
promise to reward
somewhat
fellow
obscure.
Taoist Xiao.
It was as if
How could
sand
fellow
was
Taoist
mixed in a
Xiao
river.
forget
although
this
it did
matter.
not affect the
With
river
that said,
water.
Chun
It
Kuei
always
took
had
out
a
a storage bag from her waist.
No wonder
and handed
only
it to
Foundation
Xiaohua,
establishment
saying,
and
"This
Golden
is what I
Core
promised fellow
cultivators
Daoist
can come
Xiao
to the
a few
Ink
days ago.
Zhao Black
Now,
Forest.
Fortunately,
Xiao
I didn't
Hua
disappoint you.
somewhat understood.
I brought all
Qi
the
refining
trash of my
cultivators'
burial flower
meridians
manor
are
over these
filled
years
with true
and
qi.
gave it to fellow
When these black
Daoist
things
Xiao.
enter the body,
All these years,
it is like a huge
everything,
rock blocking
Xiao Hua
the true
blinked his
qi,
eyes and said with a
affecting the
smile,
use of magic
I thought
power
that these things would be kept
in the body
secret
of Foundation
burial
establishment
flower
cultivators,
so I didn't dare
it can
to have
only
too
be
much hope.
treated as
I didn't
gravel.
think of it.
As
Fellow
for Golden
Daoist,
Core
please forgive me.
cultivators, all of
He
their
is just some
magic
trash.
power is in the
Since
Golden
fellow
Core.
Daoist has
These
taken
black
it,
things
we don't need to
may
destroy
not
it.
necessarily
Chun
enter the
Kuei
body.
saw Xiao
However,
Hua take the
Xiao
storage
Hua's
bag,
true essence
and her
was
face
originally
was a bit
filled with
strange.
many black
She
spots
replied
of
with a
Earth's
smile,
crystal, Yao
"Since
milk.
fellow Daoist
When these
Xiao
inexplicable
wants it and I can return the
things
favor,
entered his
why
meridians,
not?
It
Thank
only
you,
made
fellow
Xiao
Daoist.
Hua
Xiao Hua
somewhat
didn't
obscure
look
and
It
cupped his
actually
hands.
did not have
No
any
need to
effect.
thank me. Even these black spots were absorbed
Chun
by the
Kuei
earth
let out a
crystal
sigh of
Yao
relief
milk
and returned
increasing little by little.
Fellow Daoist
still
Jew,
needs to
it should
keep
be
this
here.
matter a secret.
When the Jade Girl
and can't
flew
mention
to
it
a certain
third
distance
person.
from the ink
I'll leave
Zhao
now.
Black
Fellow
Forest,
Daoist
it
Xiao,
stopped.
please wait
It
here.
hovered in the air
Presumably,
and did not move
the Manor
forward.
Lord will have
Chun
arrangements.
covered it with
If
her
fellow
sleeve,
Daoist
and
has
the Jade
any other
Girl
matters,
turned back into
you
a
can tell the
jade
servants to
spoon
call me
and fell
over.
into her hand. Okay, Xiao Hua replied and watched Chun Kuei leave. Xiao Hua waited until
Chapter
Chun Kuei
1992.
left before
This
closing
place
the door.
doesn't look any
He thought
different.
that burial flower
Xiao
manor
Hua
would
you
be
looked
on guard
around
against him,
and saw
but
that
he didn't
the core
expect
soil
that
was
Chun Kuei
suffused
would
with dim
really
light.
deliver these things.
Lo, clawing
However,
vines
when he
clung
opened the
tightly to
storage
the
bag
ground.
and scanned
The
it with his
thumb-sized
divine
leaves
sense,
on them were uneven.
he was even more
and there were
delighted.
all kinds of shapes.
The thick trees in front of them were so thick
Chapter
that several people
1984.
could wrap their arms
It turned
around
out that there were not
the
only
trees
a
were
lot
not
of seeds
perfectly
in
straight,
storage bags,
some were
but also
twisted,
a few withered
some were
and
slanted,
broken jade
and the
orchid
branches were
bamboos.
crisscrossed.
What surprised Xiao
Strange
Hua the
birdsong
most
could be heard
was
from
that the
sides
roots of the
or in
beauty
front of him,
retaining grass
rising
that he had
and
always
falling
wanted were
one
also
after
in
another.
front of him.
Suddenly,
Thinking of
there
what
was the
Chun
sound of
Kuei
wind
had said,
lifting
Xiao
up the
Hua
branches
secretly
and
nodded
leaves,
and said,
making one feel
giving
chill.
people immortal
Zhu
grass
Qinghe
leaves
clapped
a
his
lingering
hands, and a
fragrance.
green light
Sure enough,
flew out from his storage
therefore,
bag.
Xiao
It was
Hua
a
didn't
palm-sized
hesitate.
jade flask.
His mind entered
Under
the
the
space
activation
and
of
woke
his dermic
all the
powers,
puppets.
the jade
On a piece
flask
of wasteland,
spewed out
he
a
leveled the
silvery
medicinal
white
field
light.
and
The light
prepared
was
to
like a
plant
fountain
all
that
the
poured
abandoned
down
seeds.
from the top of
The
Zhu
jade
Qinghe's
orchid
head,
bamboos were
protecting him.
inserted into the
Xiao
pool
Hua
of
could
water
clearly
where
see that the
water
light
pattern
was
butterfly
slightly
was.
wrinkled and reflective.
As for the
light,
lifeless roots
it was actually
of
in the
beauty
form of
retaining
granules,
grass,
which seemed to
Xiao
be able
Hua
to block
thought
out
for a moment
the black things
and threw them
in the
far
ink
away at
Zhao
the edge
Black
of the
Forest.
space.
He didn't want to do
Hua,
anything at this
the ink
time
sand
to
and the
avoid
ink any
Zhao Black
accidents.
Forest. It
is
seems that I
very
have to
strange.
properly
The
understand
deeper you go,
control of
the more
space.
there are.
Not
Xiao
only
Hua
does the
thought,
ink sand
now there are
drill
more
into
and
your
more
meridians,
things in the
but it can
space.
also block
Little
the
silver
circulation
and
of little
true
yellow
essence,
are obedient,
and
even
if the
corroded.
dream mirage
It also
butterfly hatches
seeps
from the
into your
egg,
meridians,
I may not be
making
able to
your
control
entire
it.
body heavier.
I have to separate
in the
these
end,
things.
your entire body
Xiao Hua
won't be
already
able to
understood
move.
the cultivation
Xie
method
Jiqian
of
reminded
countless
Xiao
threads.
Hua from the side.
It was very strange,
Normal protective light,
so he didn't dare to
can't
try
block the
it
ink
this time.
sand.
Thinking
You're a
for a
disciple
moment,
of the
he used
Imperial
earth
Thunder Sect.
amplification
So,
to slowly
if you're not of the
refine
lightning
the
attribute,
earth crystal,
then you're
Yao
the
milk.
fire attribute.
At the same time,
if you release your protective
he began
lightning
to comprehend
of fire,
the mystery
it should be
of
effective.
soul stab in his heart.
As he spoke,
far to the
Xie
north of the
Jiqian
country of
also
Xi,
clapped his hand
in a place where there
and
were
a strange
few people,
magic tool that
the
looked
wind
like a gourd
whistled
appeared.
and
A
yellow
layer of
sand
faint
filled the air.
flame like spirit
sand
light
and
protected
dust
that
that
covered the
Xie
sky,
Jiqian
seeing everyone take out
constantly
their
fluttered in the
methods,
air.
making the
Xiao
whole
Hua felt
world
bitter.
look like a
He
dim
only knew
yellow.
that he was coming to the
a
ink
dim yellow
Zhao Black
brilliance
Forest
flew
flying
across
road.
the distant
So he didn't
sky.
make any
And
preparations.
then a powerful divine
in the burial
sense
flower
swept
manor
through the yellow
there was clearly
sand.
time to
When
explain,
the brilliance fell,
but no
and
one
the
said a word
brilliance
to him.
slightly
Now that he was
dissipated,
here,
they
they
wanted
wanted
him
him
to
to
take
take
out
out
his
his
methods.
methods.
This
It was
cultivator's
clearly
face was thin.
Gidge. His
Chun
body
Yi
was
was wearing
slender,
a tricolored
and under a
robe,
pair of
and the
sword-like
cloud-like
eyebrows.
mist
His
enveloped her
eyes were
inside.
bright and
She
full
flew
of
to Xiao
expression.
Hua's side
The most
and said with a
peculiar
smile,
thing was that the
Xiao
cultivator was
It's not that I
carrying
don't want to
a
remind
long
you,
sword on
but
his
I thought
back.
that this place
This
was hidden,
cultivator
and
was
I
none
couldn't let you
other
out
than
of
the sect
burial
master
flower
of
man.
7 skills.
Since you can't go out,
Reverend
what's the
Lou
use
and
of telling you?
a late
If you have any
nascent
tricks up your
soul-stage
sleeve,
cultivator.
use them for now.
Reverend Lou and
Otherwise,
showed his
I have a
figure,
Yusha that can
patted his
block
hand,
Mo Sha
and took out
as
a
well.
jade slip from his
After
storage
saying
bag.
that,
He scanned it
He
with his
took out a
divine
thin
sense,
robe,
and
then looked
handed
up
it
at
to
the
Xiao
surroundings
Hua.
and said in a
Xiao Hua
low
knew
voice,
that since a
"It's
golden
here."
core cultivator had
However,
to take out a
to create
magic
such a
weapon
vicious
to protect
scene,
himself seriously.
that fellow is
His
quite
own flame
thoughtful.
might not
Then,
necessarily be
Immortal
of use.
Yoshu waved
Thus,
his hand.
he didn't hold
and
back,
the long
and
sword
reached
behind
out
his
to
back
grab the silk
instantly
cloth
turned
and
into
put
a
on with the
rainbow,
flip of his hand.
splitting
He
into
saw that the
four
silk
and
cloth
flying
was thin
away
and
in
tight,
different directions.
producing a
After
faint
10
brilliance
minutes, the
that
four
blocked
swords
the ink
flew
sand.
back,
making it seem as if he wasn't wearing it at all.
There's no one around.
Thank you.
The corners of
Lord
Reverend
Chun,
Lu
Xiao
Su's
Hua
mouth
bows,
curved
and says,
into a smile.
Kid,
He was just
I really
about to
don't
take
have
back his
any
sword when
protective
suddenly
magic
a
treasures
slight
here.
buzzing sound
Yes,
came out from
just
under
remember
his
it in
feet.
your heart.
Reverend Lu
Chun
and
Yi
I
smiled
was slightly
and looked
startled.
into the ink.
He had already
shadow
checked
black
this place
forest.
before. Manor Lord
Otherwise,
Chun, he would
please
not have
lead the
missed
way.
it.
How could
Zhu
it be
Qinghe
ordinary
said in a
if
low
he,
voice after
nascent
releasing his
soul
divine
cultivator,
sense.
could not find
and
it.
looking for a moment.
Indeed,
Chun
Chun
didn't
didn't
hold
hold
back
back
and waved
a
her
few
hand,
palm size, saying,
yellowish desert
fellow
scorpions
cultivators,
slowly
please
crawled
follow
out of the
me.
sand,
Then,
not far away
as if
from
to remind
Reverend
them,
Lu.
she says,
Desert
this secret
Scorpion
path was discovered
Reverend
by
Lu and
a fellow
I was
cultivator
somewhat
by chance.
surprised, but
He
now
just
that
told me
he'd
the
seen
general
desert
direction
scorpions,
en route.
he felt slightly relieved.
This is the
first time I've entered it. Although
the
there are
secret
few
path
people around,
is about 100
it's not as
feet from the
harsh as the
ground
northern desert,
and about 10
the desert
feet in
scorpions
radius.
should not have
If your
come
divine
here.
sense is strong
Reverend
enough,
Lu and
you should
I
be able to
knew
find some
that the
clues.
desert scorpions
However,
were born with the
although
nature
there
of
is a
Earth
secret path
and mixed together
and we
with the
could fly in
sand
it,
of the northern
we better
desert.
not go too fast.
Ordinary divine sense.
It is said that the
could
outer
not
diameter
separate
of the
them at all.
secret path.
Therefore,
is
it was not
very
surprising that he could
thin.
not
If we
find
attract
them.
too much spiritual chi of
However,
heaven and
what
earth,
happened next
the
made him
secret
frown
path
deeply.
will be destroyed.
According to the ancient records,
we can
the
fly
desert
in the secret
scorpion
path.
was usually
We
docile
can't fly
and
outside
good at attacking
Xiao
groups of
Hua
people
is a little
and
surprised
would never attack
and looks at the dark
unless it was
forest in the
disturbed.
distance.
But now,
The MO
it
shot
had actually
can enter the
circled
meridians
above
with
the
the
yellow
spiritual
sand for a
chi
while,
of heaven
then
and
wielded
earth.
its large,
Although the
sharp
MO
pincers
shot
and
disappears
flew
after
straight
leaving
towards
the ink
Reverend
shadow
Lu.
black forest.
This,
It is obvious
Reverend
that the
Lu
magic
and I
power of
scanned
ordinary
them with his divine
cultivators is
sense
greatly
and
reduced
could not help
in
laughing.
the ink shadow
Although the
black
desert
forest.
scorpions were
No wonder
terrifying,
ordinary
there were tens
cultivators
of thousands
can't
of
enter
them.
it.
Moreover,
As for those
in the
rogue
depth of the northern
cultivators,
desert,
they can only
once
swim
they appeared
in the
there would
periphery.
definitely be
While
hundreds
Xiao Hua
of
is
thousands
thinking,
or even
he
millions
has already
of them.
followed
These
few
huge
desert
desert
scorpions
into the ink
not to
shadow
mention
black forest
Reverend
for
Lu
more
and
than
I,
100 feet.
a late Yuan
Xiao Hua
stage
has a
cultivator,
feeling that he is
even
trying to
gold core
escape
stage
through the
cultivators
sand.
or
A faint,
foundation
faintly
establishment stage
discernible
cultivators
repelling
could
force
definitely
is
kill
produced,
them with their own
as if it is
magical
trying to
abilities.
squeeze him out of the ink
Swish,
shadow.
Reverend
black
Lu
forest.
and I,
When no one was
casually
paying
waved
attention,
his flying
Xiao
sword.
Hua
A
opened
sword
his
light
dark eyes.
flashed,
Just
and
as
unexpectedly
he had said,
several
the
desert
black sand around
scorpions
them
were
was
killed
much
at the
lighter.
same time.
It looked like a
from different
passageway.
directions.
About
Looking at the
30 meters
remains
above
of
the
the
desert
ground,
scorpions,
the edges of the
falling on
passageway
sand,
swayed
and then being
slightly,
blown away
like
by the
seaweed
wind.
swaying
Reverend
in the water.
Lu and I,
Motherfucker,
slightly
how are
shook
these
his head.
passageways
Cultivation is
Do other people
always
have
the
the same
theme
Dharma eyes
of
as I do?
eternity.
Xiao
As
Hua
strong
is a little
as
speechless.
Yuan
After
stage
flying for
cultivators,
another hour,
as
because
weak
they are not
as
flying
desert
fast,
scorpions,
and the
in front of an
passage is
existence
not leading
with a
directly
profound
to the
cultivation,
inside of the
they can
ink
only
shadow
be
black forest.
Unfortunately,
There's some twists and
before
turns
Reverend
like a
Lu and
small
I
path in the
could
forest.
finish his words, a
Although
swish,
it leads
swish
to a
sound was
secluded
heard
place,
from under his feet.
it is still
The
a
clear
winding
cry
path.
became more and
Fellow
more
Zhu, don't
ear-piercing.
worry.
This is back. No wonder Reverend Lu and
Although we
I
can fly
could
in
not
this
express
secret
his
passage.
feelings. It seems to
His
be a
face
little long.
slightly changed,
Chun Yi said in a low
and he
voice.
hurriedly flew
Her
up from the
voice
sand
is very
and
loud
floated
in
in
the
the
dark.
dark.
And the
Underneath
crisp
his
chirps
feet,
and the surroundings
within the
are
range
much
of fainter
fainter now,
miles,
indicating that they have
scorpions
entered the
emerge
depths
from
of the
the
yellow
shadow
waves
black
one
forest.
after another.
Well, it's
like
not bad.
surging
Zhu
tadpoles.
Qinghe
said with a smile. Although
What
I went
surprised
directly
Reverend
last
Lu
time,
and I
didn't
the
fly
most
so
was that
fast
not only
or
were the
so
clear
easily,
cries
and
mixed
I
with
used a
each
lot
other,
of magic
faintly
power,
having the effect
although
of
this
seizing one's
secret
soul,
passage
but
is
also
a long detour.
one after another.
It is better
weak
divine
in that it is
wills,
easy.
mixed with
Alas,
emotionlessness.
if I came to the
excitement,
ink shadow,
anger,
black
and
forest
other
alone,
emotions, even if I know that the sword of mortal's remains are inside,
Reverend Lu and
I
I
may
was
not
slightly
dare
startled.
to break into the
Although he
inner
was
layer
not
of the
afraid
ink
of these little
shadow
things,
black forest.
being surrounded by
Chang
tens of
Yefeng
thousands
sighed
of desert
in a low
scorpions
voice. Was also
the sword
an
of mortal's
extremely annoying
remains.
thing.
Xiao
Moreover,
Hua's body
there might be
trembles,
other
and
spiritual
his eyes are
creatures
filled
among
with
these desert
disbelief.
scorpions.
Looking at Xie
Buzz,
Zhiqian beside
while
him,
Reverend Lu
Xie
and I
Zhiqian
was
coughed
hesitating,
and said in a low
hundreds and
voice,
thousands
"Fellow
of desert
Chong,
scorpions had
you should
already
be careful
flown
with
up
your
and
words.
swarmed towards him from all
we are
directions.
already at the edge
Sun
of the
Yunzi,
ink shadow
this is not a
black
trick of
forest.
this guy, is
Even
it?
if Xiao Hua
A thought
wants
suddenly
to
came to
leave,
Reverend
he needs
Lu
to have the
Yi's
courage
mind.
to do so.
He had come here at Sun
Chang Chang
Yunzi's
Yefeng
invitation,
sneered.
but he
Even if he
immediately
wants to
denied it.
leave,
It was definitely
not
not
an easy thing
Well,
to plot against a
since we are here,
late-stage
I guess fellow
soul
Chang
cultivator,
also has doubts
and
in
this
your
simple
heart,
northern
and
desert was
you want me
simply
to
not a
explain
good
the
place
reason?
to do so.
Zhu Qinghe understood Chang
Reverend
Yefeng's
Lu and
meaning
I and
waved
thought
his
that
hand,
Xiao Hua didn't
and
know
the
the
long
truth,
sword in his hand
so he nodded
flashed
slightly
with
and
several
said.
beams of
Then
light.
he
Killing
looked at the
all
darkness
the
in the
desert
distance
scorpions
and said,
within 1,000 feet.
Since Manor Lord Chun
At the same
found this
time,
secret
his
passage,
body also
and we
flew
have some
up
free time
and was about to fly
let's just
into
kill
the
some
distance.
time.
I will tell
However,
you everything,
when Reverend
so that
Looney's
you won't
body
be
had just
confused.
flown up 1,000
Senior Zhu,
feet,
thank you
a
for your
pitch-black
explanation.
beam of light
Xiao
suddenly
Hua
flashed
said
across the
respectfully.
yellow sand.
This
about
junior is
100 feet
indeed
below him.
confused.
Following
And
the
I don't know
whistling
why you
wind
came
and
to this
sand and
dangerous
Madeira,
place.
That
of
beam
course,
of light
if
was
you don't
both
want to tell
crooked
me,
and
this junior will just
fast,
follow you inside,
striking towards Reverend Looney's
I didn't tell
lower
you
body.
before, because
Ouch.
this matter
There's
is
more.
too secretive.
Reverend Lou and
has
I
something
was
to do
slightly
with our
angry.
cultivation.
He rubbed his
If
left
others
hand,
knew, and a splendid
especially
ray
the
of light
cultivators of the
was
Seven
produced.
Skills sect,
As his
who
hand
used flying
gesture
swords.
fell, the ray
I'm
of
afraid
light
we
fell
wouldn't have a
down
chance.
rapidly.
Zhu
And the
Qinghe
wind and
said with a
sand and the
smile,
ray of light
on the
all
contrary,
stopped. I know
unable
that
to move
not
at all.
many of the
In the area
cultivators
where the
of
ray
Imperial
of light
Thundersect
fell,
are good at
the
using
desert
flying
scorpions
swords.
within 1,000
so I'm
feet
not
radius
afraid to
were
tell you.
either floating
This
in
is
the
why I
dare
agreed to
or
let him
entrenched
come.
on the sand layer.
TCH,
Xiao
I
Hua
just
despised
drilled
him as
out
hard.
of the yellow
If
sand.
Chun Yi
All of them
and the
stopped
others
there
didn't have
quietly,
ulterior motives,
not moving
Zhu
even a little
Qinghe
bit.
wouldn't have let him come.
Kill.
However,
Reverend Lou
without
and
waiting
I
for Xiao
stretched
Hua to
out his
speak,
right hand.
Zhu Qinghe
and
said,
a bright silver
"Xiao Hua,
sword light
do you know about
unexpectedly
sword
emerged from his
cultivators?"
hand.
As
As
his right
palm
palm
rolled
chopped
his eyes,
down and
the
shook
sword
his head
light
slightly,
rushed towards the
this
black
junior
light
was
that
previously a
attacking him.
loose
With only a
cultivator in
slight
my country
touch,
of Shi.
the black
My
light
cultivation was
smashed,
very
and
shallow,
the sword light
and
did
my
not
knowledge
stop
was
at all,
also very
piercing
limited.
into the
I
yellow
only wanted to
sand.
cultivate
Below
to
the
the 10th
yellow
layer
sand,
of Qi,
about 10
refining
feet
and
of
enter
yellow
cultivation
sand
sect.
slightly
In
trembled.
fact, this
and then
junior
became still
always
again.
wanted to enter the
Seeing
Huanghua
this,
sect.
Reverend
but who
Lou
knew
and
that I would
I
enter the
did
Imperial
not stay
Thunder
any
sect
longer.
by accident.
His body,
however,
slightly flashed.
after entering the Imperial
and he
Thunder
directly
sect,
rushed
I
up,
discovered that
flying
the
to
cultivation
1,000
sect
feet high,
wasn't a pure land.
and then threw himself
so this junior
in a certain
buried
direction.
himself.
However,
in cultivation.
as soon as he
now
flew
that
away,
I finally reached
a divine
Foundation
thought
establishment,
swept over.
I have
from
the
another direction
opportunity to
and
come
just
out
locked
and
onto him.
experience the world.
Is that fairy?
I won't
angel?
hide it from Senior.
Reverend Lou and
Presumably,
I was slightly
Senior
stunned,
also knows about
and
this
immediately
junior
recognized
sister's
that
matter.
familiar divine
This junior
thought.
only
His
cares
flowing
about
body
matters related to
stopped
himself.
in midair.
So this junior
Reverend Lou and
doesn't know much
you
about
are also
sword
here for the
cultivators.
appointment. In the
Seeing
distant
Xiao
seven-colored
Hua's
ray of
sincere
light,
words,
fairy
as if he was
Ingehua,
confessing,
who was dressed in a
Zhu Qinghe
seven-colored
smiled
robe,
and nodded.
also showed her figure, and also transmitted
He
her
didn't
voice
comment
to Reverend
and
Lou
said,
and I.
that day
in
when
surprise.
fellow Taoists
Yes,
yet
I am here for
tested
the
your sword
appointment.
light. Did you know?
It's Sun Yunzi
Isn't
who
that a
invited
flying
I.
sword?
Fellow
This
Taoist
junior
Sun
naturally
Yunzi
knows.
What are you trying
Xiao
to do?
Hua admitted
Fairy
honestly.
Inghua's figure
This
stopped
junior used
100
a
feet
flying
away
sword
from Reverend
talisman
Lou and I
when I was Qi
and said
refining.
very strangely,
And there's also a flying
I thought
sword
that I was the
talisman in my
only
storage
one who
pouch.
invited him. As he
I
spoke,
didn't expect
Xiao
that fellow
Hua
Taoist
clapped
would
his
also be
hands
invited,
as if he was going to take out
her
her
divine
divine
sword
sword
talisman
swept
from
under
her
her
storage
feet,
pouch.
and she slightly frowned.
There's no need.
Moreover,
Zhu Qinghe
there's
has
so
said
many
with a
desert
smile.
scorpions
The
here.
flying sword
Could be
talisman
that Sun
is
Yunzi
only
has
a
some
yellow
ulterior
talisman.
motives. It can't be
It's still not
compared to
time
a
yet.
real flying sword.
Let's
let
wait
alone
and see.
a spirit
Reverend
sword.
Lou and I
Yes,
glanced
please
under his
dispel my
feet
doubts,
and
Senior
said
Zhu.
coldly.
Xiao Hua
He can't
replied
be
in a
thinking of
well-behaved
leaving
manner.
all of us
Actually,
in
on
the
my
northern
Xiaoyu
desert,
continent,
right?
besides
He,
Taoist
Fairy
techniques, there
Ingehua
are
covered her
also
mouth
sword
and
cultivators,
unless
soul
he,
cultivators,
Shanghua
beast
sect,
cultivators,
also
and so
doesn't
on.
want to establish
Zhu Qinghe
himself in the
said in a
Dawn
low
Rain
voice.
continent.
Xiao
The
Hua,
two late
could it
nascent
be that your
soul
master
stage
didn't tell you
cultivators
about it?
stood in the sky with a
Zhu
strong
Qinghe
wind,
suddenly asked,
and the brilliance
causing
around their
Xiao
bodies
Hua
was
to
not
be
affected
stunned.
by the wind
He
at all,
slightly opened his
as
mouth
if they were taking
and
a
said
leisurely
awkwardly.
stroll.
This
After the
junior
time it
also
took
asked
to eat a
about it
meal
before I reached
Sun
Foundation
Yunzi's
establishment,
divine,
but my
thought
master
swept
said that I
over from
only
afar.
needed to know.
Seeing the two
and
of them
cultivate
standing
well.
in the sky.
First,
He
I
couldn't
had to
help
reach
but be
Foundation
startled
establishment and
and
transmitted
then I
his
wouldn't
voice.
ask about anything else.
Fellow Taoist,
When this
although the
junior
wind in
reached
the northern
Foundation
desert is very
establishment,
strong,
he wanted to
it's not the
introduce
time
this
for the two
junior
of you to
to the
walk
senior
hand in hand.
sisters of
It's
the
too
Imperial
cold to be
Thunder
high up
sect.
in the sky.
Why didn't this
Sun
junior
Yunzi
just escape?
Reverend Lou and
At this
I
point,
sneered,
Xiao
and looked at
Hua's
the
heart
faint red
trembled,
light, and his
on
forehead
Sun
was
Yunzi's
almost
body,
covered in
and
sweat.
transmitted his voice.
That day,
You
he had
found a
told
good
Chen
place.
Yi about the feather
If I hadn't
immortal
reacted
assembly
quickly,
at the burial flower
I'm
manor,
afraid that
but
I
he didn't
wouldn't
seem
have
to
been
have
able to
mentioned
see
the
fellow
matter of
Taoist.
Zhang Yuhe and Zhang
Fellow
Yuta.
Taoist Liu
Xiao
Kong, what do
Hua's
you mean?
eyes turned
Sun
rapidly,
Yunzi was slightly
and he
surprised
repeatedly thought about
and
it,
deliberately
seeing
swept
that
his
Chun
divine
Yi's
thought
flying
around.
figure didn't change.
When he went deep into
He
the yellow
finally
sand,
relaxed. He realized
sentimental
that something was
person.
wrong.
Zhu
He
Qinghe
couldn't help
glanced
but
at
smile
Chun
bitterly
Yi and
This
said,
is I's
sword
fault.
cultivators are
I
passed by here a few years ago,
all of their
and saw that there were no
related to
traces
a
of
flying
people here.
sword.
It was a good place.
Zhu
so
Qinghe
I
roughly
invited you to
explained
meet
the
here.
matter of sword
Who would have thought that
cultivators
after not
and
seeing
finally
each other
said,
for a few years,
actually,
there would be
sword
cultivators
cultivators
and
and
Taoist
here.
techniques aren't
I don't think it's
completely
fellow
separated.
Taoist
Within my Tao
Yunzi's
sect,
fault.
there are also many
Fairy
cultivators
in
whose
Zhuo
magic
interrupted again.
tools,
These
or
desert
magic
scorpions
treasures,
are usually
flying
in the
swords.
depths of the northern desert.
Who knows how they came to the edge today? For example,
And these things don't
fellow
seem to be
Taoists,
very
yeah,
strong.
Fellow
So they're not
Taoist
troublesome
and
to
I.
us.
Moreover, my Tao
Reverend
sect's
Liu and
flying
I
sword
naturally
technique
knew the balance
isn't
of the
inferior
tripartite
to sword
balance.
cultivators.
So he didn't
flying
say anything,
swords.
and
Even
asked
as early as
fellow
hundreds
Taoist
of thousands of
Yunzi,
years ago,
why did
there
you
were
ask us to
nascent
meet here
soul
today?
stage experts who went to the Huan country
Sun Yunzi
to
didn't care about
challenge sword
Reverend Lu
cultivators.
Su's ambiguous attitude.
Instead, he looked at Fairy Zhuo and said, "I've come to you, my fellow
Chapter
Taoists, for 2 pieces of
1993.
news. One is good news,
Xiao
and the
Hua
other is
pretended
bad
to be
news.
confused. Which one would you
The
like to
three
hear
cultivation
first?
countries are
Haha.
Shi, fellow
Meng,
Taoist Sun
and
Yunzi.
Lian.
You're
This
so
Huan
interesting.
country.
Fairy Ing
Huan
laughed.
country is the land
I
of
haven't
sword
listened to someone talk
cultivators.
like this for a long time.
Zhu Chenghe
I didn't
glared
expect
at Xiao
that fellow
Hua
Taoist,
and muttered,
who is
which
thousands of
pedantic
years
foundation
old, could
establishment
still be so
cultivator
leisurely.
is your master? He didn't even tell you this. No wonder he can only be a foundation
Chapter
establishment
1985.
cultivator. If it can make Sun
He
Yunzi laugh like
Xiao
this,
Hua didn't dare
then
to
it must
say
be good
more,
news.
and
Immortal
simply
Lu,
pretended to be
Shi's heart
ignorant.
moved.
That
As if he
cultivator
thought of
from my
something.
Dao sect,
His body
is
moved
very
slightly,
powerful,
and he
with his
said,
flying sword.
I am willing
He
to
actually
listen to
won
good news.
all
9 battles in Huan
really?
country.
Fairy
Fairy
Ing
victorious.
also thought of
Zhu
something,
Chenghe said
and
proudly.
clapped her hands.
Really?
Could it be that
this was the
that
first
thing has
time
been completed?
Xiao Hua heard
Haha.
of this. You two fellow Taoists are right.
If he defeated a
Sun
sword
Yunzi
cultivator
clapped his
with
hands,
the Dao technique,
and
it
2
wouldn't be
jade
a big
bottles were
deal.
taken out.
However,
He waved his
he
hands,
actually won with a
and
flying
the bottles
sword.
flew
This was
to
a
the
disgrace
two of
to
them.
sword
I
cultivators.
did not disappoint you.
Which sect
and
is
finally
this senior
succeeded
from?
in refining
He's
the
so
Python
powerful.
dragon pill.
Xiao Hua asked.
Humph. Which
Immortal
sect can he
Lu,
be
she
from?
waved his
Zhu
hand,
Cheng aside,
and a huge
7
light
skills
shadow
Xiao
flew
Hua
out,
said without
firmly
hesitation.
covering the jade
Zhu
bottles.
Chenghe
He
glared
said
at him.
This is fellow
and said,
Taoist Sun
Do you think
Yunzi.
only your Shi
If it
country's
was fellow
7
Taoist
skills
sect,
I'm
knows
afraid you
about
would have
flying
succeeded in
swords?
refining it
He-
10 years ago.
I'm just a frog in a well.
No.
Senior,
Fairy Ing's
please
face
enlighten
was
me.
also
Xiao
filled
Hua
with
scratched
joy.
his head.
She
and said
slightly waved
embarrassedly,
her arm. It's
and
Meng
a
country's
big
hand
hand
flew
flew
out.
Chen
Catching
Yi
the
said
jade
clearly,
bottles.
7
Then she
skill
said,
sects flying
although my
sword
Shuanyin
is
school
only
is
because
founded
the
on
current
alchemy,
sect master,
fellow Taoist
Lu and I,
Sun Yunzi's
is
alchemy
good at
skills
it.
are not
Therefore,
inferior to I.
many disciples
I dare not say
cultivate
that I can
flying
refine the
swords.
Python dragon
However,
pill.
in
Changbai
just a few
sect
years,
is established
Fairy
for flying
Ingwood
swords.
took the jade bottles.
Other Dao techniques
and her cherry
are just
lips
vassals.
slightly opened.
So it's like
She
that.
spat out a
Xiao
mouthful
Hua
of Zhen
easily
Yuan
thought of
and
Lu
opened the
Wei
jade
Gang,
bottles.
the Qi refinement
fist-sized
disciple
pill
who used a flying
emitting a
sword to
blazing
chase after Sun
brilliance
Shu
like a
during
dancing
feather
flame
immortal gathering flew
He
out of the
thought,
jade bottles.
no wonder.
As the pill
Yes,
appeared in
it's
the air,
Changbai sect from
an
Ming
incomparably
country.
rich
Zhu
medicinal
Chenghe nodded
fragrance
and said,
spread
that
around
senior's
Fairy
name
is
Ingzhuo.
Reverend Brightsword.
This medicinal
He should have been an
fragrance
early
seemed to
nascent
be
soul
stagnant
cultivator
and
at
did
that
not
time.
disperse in the
Senior
slightest
Zhu,
in the astral
did you
realm.
come to
Roar.
Immerse Zhao
The
Black
faint
Forest to
roar
find the
of a
remains
dragon
of
came
Reverend
from the
Brightsword?
python dragon.
Xiao Hua asked curiously.
Within the flames,
Don't
a
worry.
small white
Zhu
snake
Chenghe
was
smiled
rapidly
and
circling
said,
around the
after
core.
Reverend Brightsword
Every time it
returned
circled
from
around,
Huan country,
the white
he
snake
became
would change.
famous in Ming
After
country
circling around
and became
for
the next
81
leader
times,
of Changbai sect.
it actually turned into
As for
a
the
real
Huan
fire
Kingdom's
dragon.
sword cultivators,
This fire dragon
they were
was
dejected.
exactly the
Many
appearance
people
of the
began to
little
have
white
doubts
dragon.
about sword cultivators.
Great.
Fairy
Of course,
Ing was stared
Huan
at
country
for half
also
the time
has
it takes to
spiritual
drink a cup of
sword
tea,
and divine sword.
then open her mouth.
They can't
possibly
possibly
attack
attack spread
Reverend
out,
Bright,
and the
sword
python
who has a
dragon
low
pill was
cultivation
sucked into
level.
the jade bottle.
So they can only
Then
think
she
of other
cast
methods.
layers of spells
However,
on the jade bottle,
Reverend Bright
and
sword
put it
is
away in her
indeed
arms.
powerful.
Immortal
Not
Luci's
only our
face
first
was
great
also
sword
full
transformation
surprise,
stage cultivators,
and he had
already
unable
put
to be
away
his
the
match.
jade bottle.
Even the final
Thank
battle
you.
against
fellow
the second
Taoist
grade
Shuanyin,
sword transformation
Fairy
stage
Ingzhuo
cultivator,
glanced at
who is
Reverend
equivalent
Lu
to a
Shi.
mid-Yuaniing
Then both
stage
of them
cultivator.
cupped their fists
He was still
and said,
slightly superior.
This boa dragon
in an
pill
instant
is quite
he broke the
different from
myth
ones
that a sword
recorded in
cultivator's
books.
attack
I'm
power
afraid our
is
chances of
stronger
stepping
than a
into
Dao
deity
cultivator
transformation
of the
have
same
increased
level.
by another
However,
10%.
it's not like Huan country doesn't have
You don't
any
have to be so
geniuses.
polite.
At that
Sun
time,
Yunzi sighed
there was a
in his
rising
heart,
star in
but he
Huan
still
country
put on a smile
called Li
and
Xiubai.
said,
We have
his
already made an
cultivation
agreement
was
to
similar
refine
to
this
Reverend
python
Bright
dragon
swords.
pill.
And
I
he
don't
was also
dare
a
to go
first
against
grade
our
sword
agreement.
transformation
As
realm
for the mutation of the python
this
dragon
Li Xiubai's innate
it should be
talent
due to the
is
difference
unrivaled.
in the core of the
Since
python
he was young,
dragon that we
he had
killed.
spiritual energy
course,
and
Reverend Lu
perseverance.
and I
Others
nodded
only
slightly.
nurture one.
Although Sun
sword
Yunzi
pill.
had given him
Some
the python
extremely
dragon pill
powerful
today
ones only
because of
nurture
the vow
three
of
at
heart.
most.
And
It
it
was
was
something he
3
deserved.
stars
He still
glorious
felt a
sun.
little grateful.
But he actually
to Sun
nurtured
Yunzi
9
for
sword
giving him the
pills
python
in one
dragon
go.
pill. Therefore, his
9.
tone became
Xiao
much
Hua
gentler.
almost cried out in surprise.
According to the ancient
Wasn't
records,
this number the
Python
9
dragon
shattered
pill
sword
is a
pellets
half
he
dragon
obtained
from
from
the
the
Deafening
Python?
Thunder Palace?
By taking the python
wrong?
dragon pill.
Seeing Xiao
We have solved the
Hua's strange
mystery of the
expression,
transformation of a
Zhu Qing'e
python
asked
into a
curiously,
dragon.
AI,
And
this
stepped
sword
into
the
cultivating
separating
divinity
if my master
stage
was
from
here,
Yuani.
he would
Today,
definitely
this
reprimand
python
me.
dragon pill is actually a transformation from a python
Biting off
into a
more
dragon.
than you can chew.
And we have a
Xiao
deeper
Hua had a
understanding
bitter
of the
smile on his
process.
face.
He said empathetically,
Our chances of
others
stepping
cultivating
into the
separating
three
divinity
is already the
stage
limit,
have increased
but he
by
actually
more
wants
than
to cultivate
10%.
9.
And
This
even
is really
20%
beyond this
is
junior's
not surprising.
expectations.
Yes, there's
However,
indeed something
since
wrong
Senior
with that
said
white
so,
python.
Seniorly
Fairy
Shouba's
Ying
9
Zhuo looked
flying
at
swords
Sun
must have been
Yunzi
cultivated
thoughtfully.
This kind of
fellow
rare
Taoist Sun
genius,
Yunzi.
this junior,
Have you found a soul
really
that
can't
flew
imagine.
away? Sun Yunzi
Not only
smiled
you, even
bitterly.
I
have used
find it
all
hard to
my
understand.
power but I
Zhu
still
Qing has
can't
sneered.
find any clues.
Other people's 3 sword
I can't
pills
find it
are
anywhere.
3 stars.
However,
his son.
the white
But his
python
9 sword
was
pills
in the
are
separating
separating
divinity
divinity
stage
stage
9
when it
stars
was alive.
transit of the sun.
Since it has already turned
That's an
into
extremely
a
high
soul
realm
essence.
among
It is
sword
nothing to
cultivators.
worry about.
It's the legendary
if I can't
divine
find it,
sword
then I can't
realms,
find it.
sword immortal.
Sun Yunzi,
Since
naturally
childhood,
knew the effect of the
Liu
python
goal
dragon
was to
pill
cultivate
to the
due
divine
to the dragonization
sword realm
incantation,
and become, but he
a
couldn't
sword
say it
immortal.
out loud.
Chun
He
Yi's
sighed in
face
his
was
heart
filled
that
with
he didn't have
longing
enough
as she
luck,
said,
and
moreover,
quickly changed the topic.
under his tenacious
Today,
nature,
I invited the two of
under
you
his
here to tell you the
heaven-gifted
good news of the
genius,
python
those
dragon
9
pill,
sword pills
and the
were
bad
born
news.
by him one by
Oh,
one.
Reverend
Lou
Lou
and
and
fledgling
glanced
star,
at Fairy
Morning
Angela
Star,
and asked
Emblem
curiously,
Star, Brilliant
there are not
Star,
many things
Dual
in this
Star,
world that can make
Dark
us
Star,
think it is bad
Star
news,
Destroyer,
right?
Star
Exactly.
Extinction,
And
Star
Fairy
Creation.
Angela
AI,
smiled.
Heaven
Fellow
knows,
Taoists,
it's
Sun
already
Yunzi,
difficult for a sword
please
cultivator
enlighten us
to control
He,
3
fellow
flying
Taoists,
swords.
don't pretend
How
that
could
you
he
don't know
control
anything.
9 great
Sun
spirit
Yunzi
swords?
smiled. Since
That's
I
right.
know, Reverend
It is
Brightsword
impossible
went
for
to
you
Huan
two
country
not
to
know.
challenge Li Xiaobai.
Moreover, I took out the python
Unfortunately,
dragon pill.
He went at the wrong
So
time.
naturally I have
Li
full
Xiaobai
sincerity.
actually went to
This is
Million
related
Mountains
to the
train.
future of
He didn't
our
meet
3
Reverend
sects.
Brightsword. Fairy
Zhu Qinghua
Angela and
continued.
Reverend Lu
When
and
he
I
returned to
both
Flame
agreed.
Bamboo Sword
After a
sect
while,
and learned
Reverend
about Reverend
Lu and I
Brightsword,
smiled.
he was
and said,
extremely
"This is
angry
related to the
and
future
immediately
of our
came
sect,
to
so it is
main
naturally
country
a big matter.
to challenge Reverend
The people of the Immortal
Brightsword and
Alliance
Changbai
will
sect.
definitely stand
Good.
up for us.
Xiao Hua's
Why should we be
eyes
anxious?
flashed with a trace of
Immortal
brilliance
Alliance?
as he praised.
Sun,
That will
Yunzi
definitely be a
sneered.
battle
They're
that
a
will
group
shock
of
the
old
entire
farts.
Xiao
Why would
Yu
they care about our
continent.
life
That's
or
right.
death? They have reached a certain level.
As
At that
long
time,
as they pass
the cultivators
the
of the
heavenly
3
tribulation
cultivation
and
countries
become
all
immortals,
heard the news
they will be
and
free
immediately
and
moved.
unfettered.
They wanted to see
They will
this
not care
battle
about
of
us.
sword and Tao
We are still
that is
far
hard
away
to come
from the
by
Mahayana
tens of
stage
thousands of
and the
years.
heavenly
Zhu
tribulation.
Qing's face was also filled with longing as he said,
So, you
all
two
the
fellow
big
Taoists
sects, have also
big
noticed
clans,
the change
and
in the
many
spiritual
famous cities were
energy
all
of heaven
eagerly
and
waiting
earth.
for news about the time and
Fairy
location of the
Angela
battle
saw
to
that
come.
Sun Yunzi
Unfortunately,
and Reverend Lu
Li
and I were
Xiaobai
tit for
aggressively
tat
went to
again,
main country
so she had to
and
ask.
even rushed to
Yes.
Changbai sect.
Sun Yunzi
However,
nodded. Reverend
fellow
Brightsword
Taoist
of Changbai
Yingzhua
sect
is right.
treated Li
I
Xiaobai
have thought
with
hard for a
respect
long time
and was very
and
humble.
even sought the
However,
elders of our sect,
once Li Xiaobai
but still to
entered
no
Changbai
avail.
sect,
There was no
Reverend
more
Lu
news,
and I did not speak,
as if he didn't even
but the
appear.
expression on his
Chun
face
Yi said
was the same.
softly in front of
I am
him.
the same.
Until half a
Fairy
year later,
Angel was said
Reverend
with a bitter
Brightsword and Li
face.
Xiaobai
In the past
announced
10
the
years,
world on Changbai
the disciples
Peak
we
that
have
the two of
recruited
them
have become
agreed to
more
duel
and
in
more
secret
mix.
place.
They're no
Moreover,
longer as
they
excellent
agreed
as
to
before.
never announce the
Moreover,
result of the duel.
the
to
bloodline of
public.
aristocratic families
At that
has been
time,
awakening
whether it was
frequently.
the 3 cultivation
If there are no
countries
restrictions,
or Huan
they will
country,
definitely become
all the sword
great
cultivators
talents
were in
the
an
future.
uproar.
Huan
Cultivator
country's flame bamboo
aristocratic
sword
families
sect even
and
sent
those
an
rogue
elder to
cultivators
Changbai
may be on
sect
par
in
with
main
our
country.
sects.
As if to urge
Rogue
senior Li
cultivators?
Xiaobai. Reverend
Zhu
Lu
Qing's
and I
face was
shook
filled
his
with
head
reminiscence
slightly.
as he said.
The aristocratic
However,
families that
when the
fellow
flame bamboo
Taoists
sword
mentioned
sects
are
elders
possible,
came to Changbai
but the
sect.
so-called
Reverend
rogue
Brightsword
cultivators
and
Li Xiaobai were
unnecessary.
both gone.
The rogue
Li
cultivators
Xiaobai
that I
left
mentioned
at Jade Slope
are devil
and
cultivators.
said that he was going to duel with
Fairy
Reverend
Angel
Brightsword.
was sneered.
As for
Fellow
where he
Taoist
went,
Lu Kong
Changbai
does
sect
not know about the
sectmaster
rise
and
of the
elders
heavenly
also
demon
didn't
sect.
know.
There are
Flame
also
bamboo
many
sword
rogue
sect
cultivators who
originally
have joined the
thought
devil
Li
sect.
Xiaobai had been used
Yes,
as secret
I
technique
naturally know
by
about
Changbai
this.
sect.
Reverend
But
Lu
when
and
they
I
saw Li
nodded.
Xiaobai,
They're just a
Jade
group
Slip,
of motley
they
crew
naturally had
under
nothing
the
to
banner
say
of devil
and could only
cultivators.
wait on
They are
Changbai
incomparably
Peak.
filthy.
This wait
and have
lasted
all
for
kinds of
another half a
cultivation.
year.
They will not amount
Zhu
to
Qing has
anything.
sighed and
Yes,
said, it seems
until
that there
one
used to be
day,
a small
Reverend
organization
Brightsword's
abandoned
disciple
by the
saw that there
heavens,
was some
which was
movement
controlled
in
by
the
the heavenly
sect's
demon
messaging
sect.
secret array.
The heavenly
After
demon
recognizing
sect
that it was
is
Reverend
nothing in our
Brightsword who
eyes.
sent the message,
At this time,
he
we don't
immediately
need to care
informed
about
the
them.
sect
Sun
master
Yunzi
and
smiled
flame
and
bamboo
said,
sword sect.
what I mean is if our
At this
3
time,
sects still
Reverend
don't find a way
Brightsword's
to
life
recruit
tablet in
disciples
Changbai sect
or
was
find a
also
suitable
damaged.
cultivation method
When
for future
Changbai
disciples,
sect's sect
then
master
the 3
and
major
flame
cultivation
bamboo
sects
sword
of the state
sect's
of Xi
elder
I'm
saw
afraid we'll
Reverend Reverend
have to
Bright,
change
Sword's
sex.
nascent soul.
It can't
image
be that
transmission.
serious.
They knew that
Reverend
the duel
Lou
had
and I
already
laughed.
ended. Reverend Bright Sword really
I've had
kept
a
his
deep
promise
talk with the
and didn't
elders.
say a word
The
about
current
the result of the
cultivation
duel.
method
He
is
only
still
arranged
usable,
some matters
but
in
the
the
method
sect,
of selecting
and then
disciples
turned
has to be
off the
changed.
image transmission.
Only when the method is found.
Our 3 sects will still be able to live forever. Chapter 1994. However,
Chapter 1986.
Immortal Bright, Sword's native
I'm not afraid
spiritual
now,
tablet
but
was
what about in the
damaged,
future?
indicating that
Sun
he had
Yunzi
died.
said
Even his
solemnly,
nascent soul
it's only been a
could
few
not
decades.
escape. At
What if
first,
it's 1,000
the
years
Elder
later,
of Flame
or
Bamboo Sword sect
10,000
thought
years later?
that Li Xiubai
The spiritual
could
chi
win,
of heaven
but after
and
waiting for a
earth
long
has
time,
completely changed.
Li Xiubai did
Can
not
cultivation
return,
methods
so he
still be
hurried back to
cultivated?
Huan Country.
Hearing this,
it is said that Li
Fairy
Xiubai's
Ingua
natal
and
spiritual
Immortal Lu
tablet
and I
also
were
had a
silent
crack.
for a while. The two of
Obviously,
them
they
actually
had thought
perished
about it.
together. This matter is
Immortal
unusual.
bright swords.
I want to discuss it with you
two
two
not
first.
completely spread.
I have a plan,
but there was a
and
sentence
then
that
I'll
all the
discuss it with the leaders of several sects in Meng
without
country
waiting for
and
Zhu
Lian
Qinghe
country.
to finish.
We have to come up with a
Chang
countermeasure.
and Xie
Sun
Jiqian
Yunzi
both
said
in unison.
I always
Sword
feel
Dao
that
has
this
no
matter
regrets.
is unusual.
Yes, it is
If
this
it's not
sentence.
handled well, the
Zhu
Taoist
Qinghe
sect
nodded.
maybe
Although our
doomed
Taoist sect
eternally.
uses flying
Maybe
swords as magic
varying
tools.
aside,
Unlike sword
I also
cultivators
did
who
something
use
in the
their
sect,
lives
but
to
the effect
nurture
was
their
not
swords.
too obvious.
They still use their
Moreover,
swords as
this
their
involves the
lives.
secret
Immortal
of my Shuan
bright
sect.
swords.
Forgive I for
sentence
not being
really
able to
hit
tell
the
you bottom of
everything.
my heart.
Well, yes,
Since
for
fellow
this battle,
Taoist
all the
said
sects
so.
have their own guesses.
You're already open-minded.
And there are records in
Sun
their own
Yunzi
ancient
glanced at
books.
Immortal Lu and I.
Chang Yefeng
and said
nodded.
with a smile.
But what actually
to
happened?
be honest, no one
I also
knows.
did some experiments.
In order to find the
but they
truth,
were all not good.
all the sects
There's
sent
no
out their
effect.
forces.
What about
first
Huan
in Meng
country,
Immortal
then in
Lu and I
country,
sneered.
and Lian country?
I wonder how their
and
sword
even Huan
cultivators and
country.
beast
We
cultivators
didn't find
are
any
doing.
trace of it.
Zhu
Fellow
Qinghe said
Taoist
again.
Lu Kang,
However,
in
Sun
the end,
Yunzi
the
said
head of
with a
Changbai
smile,
sect
if our
found
Taoist
clues
sect
from mortal
is in
bright
danger,
swords
I'm
and
afraid
nascent
these
soul,
cultivators
and
will have an
concluded that it was in
opportunity
Shi
to take
countries,
advantage of
M.O.
it.
Zhao
According to the
Black
message from the
Forest.
disciples,
It may
in the
even
sect,
be in the core.
they've also changed.
So,
However,
Changbai sect
the
secretly
specific
searched
situation is
M.O.
not clear.
Zhao Black
After
Forest,
all,
and
the
lost a lot
disciples
of
who can go
experts,
deep into
but still
Huan
found
country
no
are
trace.
all low-level cultivators.
Later, this news
it's
was
impossible for
discovered
them
by some
to
people,
reach the core,
and it was completely
Varying
leaked,
with thought for a
attracting
while,
many
and
sword
said,
cultivators to
well,
come here to
I'll go
search.
back and think
What
about
was
it
the result?
carefully.
Xiao
If there's
Hua
any
suddenly
progress,
asked a
let's
seemingly
communicate more.
extremely stupid
Sun
question.
Yunzi waved his
Chun
hand
Yi
and
said with a
said,
smile.
In fact,
If they found
if
it,
only one sect
why would we
has
come
a
here
secret,
today?
That
Xiao
sect
Hua
will
said with a
dominate.
smile.
However,
What I mean
if
is
the
M.O.
Taoist sect
Zhao Black
declines,
Forest
that
is
sect
so
will
big,
definitely not
and there
last
are
long.
thousands of
Fellow
cultivators in
Taoists,
Shi
do you think so too?
How could they not find
Yes.
it?
Even if
Fairy
M.O.
Zhao
Zhao
Black
Black
Forest
while
is
Immortal
dangerous.
Lu and I
What about
did not
Funshin
comment.
stage seniors?
Of course.
What about
apart from these
Deshang
two
stage
pieces of
seniors?
news,
Can't
I
you
invited
just
you here
ask
today
any one of them?
for another more important matter,
little friend Xiao,
which is related to our
you still
cultivation.
don't understand.
I'd like to hear your
Xie
opinion.
Jiqian smiled and
As
said,
Sun Yunzi spoke,
I heard that there's
he
a
looked
famous
at the two's
rogue
expressions.
cultivator in your country.
Just as he
of Shi.
expected. I
The
think he's
two's
called Old
expressions
Man
were
by
calm.
Jean.
Clearly,
His cultivation
they had the same
technique
perception
can be cultivated to the foundation
now that the
establishment
spiritual
stage,
chi
which is a
of
great
heaven and
temptation
earth
to
has
rogue
changed.
cultivators. Not only
Many
does
rogue
it affect the
cultivators are looking
cultivation
for
of
him.
low-level disciples,
You must have had such a
but it
plan
also
back then,
restricts
right?
high-level
But if
cultivators
the current you were
like
to
us.
ask you to
Sun
search for his
Yunzi opened his
orthodoxy,
mouth
would you
and
go?
said,
Many
Many
of
of
the
the
elders
elders
of
of
my
my
splendid
splendid
sect
sect
who have been cultivating
Taoist
diligently
Master
have
Bright
not
Sword
made
and
any
Shobai
progress
are
in their
indeed handsome
cultivation
for a
more
while
than 10 years.
and can be considered world-shaking.
Occasionally, they
But
would
in
make
front
some
of these
progress,
seniors,
but
they
it
are
was all
still
due
nothing.
to other opportunities.
Yes, that's one thing.
I believe the same is
Zhu
true
Qinghe said
for
with a
Xu
smile.
School.
On the
and
other hand,
Qiqiao
in the
sect,
three kingdoms of
seeing that
cultivation,
immortal Lu
Taoist
and I
magic
and
cultivation
Fairy
is
Zhua
still the
did
priority.
not speak.
There are few
Sun Yunzi's
cultivators
eyes
who
flickered,
practice
and he
flying
continued.
swords.
Low-level
Low-level
cultivators
cultivators need
more
very
in the
little
whereabouts
spiritual
of these
chi
two people.
of heaven and earth.
Enlightened
The
Master
change of
Bright
spiritual
Sword's
chi of heaven
orthodoxy
and earth
was in
will
the
not
Changbai
affect
sect.
their cultivation.
Li Xiubai's
However,
orthodoxy was
we
also
use
in
too
the
much
flame
spiritual
bamboo
chi of
sword
heaven
sect.
and earth for our cultivation. Now that the spiritual chi
What he needed
of
to find
heaven
was
and
Reverend
earth
Bright
has
Sword's
changed,
long sword,
our
and Li
cultivation will
Xiubai's
naturally
9
be
star
affected.
transit.
The same
However,
must be true for
since
the
the two
other
of them had
seniors of the
already
divine
perished together,
transformation realm.
their flying
void
swords might
refinement
not be
realm
intact,
and body
even if they were
integration realm.
found.
In other
it would
words,
be useless
simply
for sword
absorbing the
transformation
spiritual
swordsmen
chi
and
of
heaven
heaven
and
and
earth
earth will not satisfy.
I understand.
Our cultivation.
Xiao
needs.
Huan nodded and said,
For
spiritual
seniors are
herbs
looking for these
and
tills
flying
are like
swords,
spiritual stones,
as well as the remains
only
of
when
the
they
two
are
seniors
precious
and their
can they
storage
support
bags.
our cultivation.
Yes, for us
progress.
golden core cultivators,
For example,
these
the
things are
python
the most
dragon
attractive.
is
Zhu
not
Qinghe
only needed
did not
for us
hide
to
it
break
and
through the
nodded.
barrier. If we can
But
obtain
also
their
for us
legacy,
to
it will be
replenish our
extremely
spiritual
useful for
power.
us to break
The spiritual
through
stone
to the
mine will
nascent
also be
soul
the
realm.
key to our
It might even be our
cultivation
only
in the
chance.
chance.
Moreover,
as
Zhu
early as
Qinghe
10 years
glanced
ago,
at Chang Yefeng
there seems to be
and
some
said,
news from the Immortal
although the
Alliance
various
that
sects
many
have their own
sects have
guesses
already
and
begun
have their
to
own opinions
stockpile
about the place of
spiritual
their duel,
stones, they have overlooked with the change of spiritual. This is also something that I suddenly realized. The current spiritual herbs can still satisfy our needs. Chang Yefeng asks.
That's
However, if the spiritual herbs in the future are mixed with the
Chen was
change
also
of
eager
spiritual
to know.
chi of heaven
After
and
all,
earth, he
the
also did
quality of
not
the pills
understand how
refined will
Zhu
definitely
Chenghe
decline.
could know
At that
about
time,
such a secret
even if they can
satisfy
He,
low-level
I'll
cultivators.
keep you in suspense for
They
now.
will not be able to
Zhu
satisfy
Chenghe
high-level
laughed and
cultivators
said,
like us.
When you see it,
In addition,
you will
I have just
naturally
received a
understand.
piece of news.
At that time,
in the past 10
I
years,
didn't think too much
there were
about it
3
until I saw the
seniors of the
strange
Great
scene there.
Ascension realm.
However,
who
it
went
was
through the
also
heavenly
because of this that I
tribulations.
felt that I didn't
However,
have much
they never
confidence in
returned.
breaking in.
Their natal
So I
spiritual
retreated to
tablets
find the
were
3 of
damaged,
you to help
and
me.
none of them succeeded.
Then,
He glanced at Xiao Hua. Immortal Lu Shi,
I didn't see the
who had
heavenly
been silent all this
grass,
time, but
said,
according to my guess
Sun
and the
Yunzi,
sex records,
aren't your
it should
words
be
a bit
there in that
alarmist?
environment. If the three
Yes,
seniors all
I
succeeded,
hope senior's guess is
how
correct.
could it be called
At this
heavenly
time,
tribulations?
Xiao Hua's heart
Even
was
if
far less
300
bitter
people
than
failed to
before.
pass
Since
the
he knew that
heavenly
Zhu
tribulations
Qinghe
and the
it would
others
be
were
normal,
looking for
right?
10 flying
Lu
swords,
Shi, don't
and
you
that it was
understand?
related to sword
Sun
cultivation.
Yunzi said
Xiao Hua was already
the
eager to
spiritual
try.
chi of heaven
Even if there was
and
no
earth
heavenly
has
yin
changed.
grass,
And
this
so
trip
has the
might
heavenly
still have a
Tao.
harvest.
I'm afraid our
The
path
heavenly
to
yin grass's
immortality
nature is
will be
neutral.
blocked.
Its nature
doesn't
is
seem to be that
neutral.
serious.
And yin and
Fairy
yang.
Ying
Shun
said
was very
hesitantly.
familiar with spiritual
The Taoist
herbs
sect of the
and
Dawn
whispered,
Rain continent has
at
existed
this time,
for tens of
a
thousands
divine
of
sense
years
swept
since the
over
ancient
from
times.
afar.
It won't be
Sweeping
so
past
fragile.
everyone,
If our
and
cultivation
immediately
can
locking them.
improve,
Zhu
what will happen to
Qinghe
the
was
Taoist
extremely
sect?
embarrassed
Sun
and angry,
Yunzi said
and with a
angrily,
light rebuke,
what will happen to
his
it?
divine
All
sense
cultivators
also
will reach
rushed
the
out.
nascent
Fellow
soul
Taoists,
stage
help
at
me.
the end of their cultivation.
In the future, they will just wait
A
for the end of
slightly
their
old
lifespan
voice
to come
transmitted
and
from
enter
where
the
the divine
reincarnation
sense
cycle
swept over,
and the tone was very
No,
anxious.
impossible. This is
Fairy
bad.
Ying was
Zhu
smiled
Qinghe's
and shook her
divine
head.
sense swept
Fellow
over
cultivator Sun
and
Yunzi
immediately
knew
knew
the
the
origin
origin
of the matter.
Right now,
His face was
there are
slightly
many
shocked,
great
and he
ascension
whispered,
realm,
and
this is
tribulation
that
passing
shameless
realm
cultivator
seniors in the three
He couldn't get
countries
rid
of
of
the Dawn Rain
Mo,
continent.
Zhao
There are
himself.
even more
So he actually
great
led him to
ascension
us.
realm and
Quickly
tribulation
get out.
passing
Don't let
realm
that guy
seniors
find
in the
out about
distant
the
cultivation
secret
alliance
passage
and
Chun Yi's
cultivation
divine
empire.
sense was
How can the
not
cultivation
inferior to
world
Zhu
fall
Qinghe's
into such a
and
state?
she immediately
He, what's
urged.
impossible?
Xiao Hua
Sun
and the
Yunzi
others
saw
didn't
that
dare to be
immortal Lu
negligent,
she was about
and they
to
quickly
retort.
followed.
So
he
Zhu
said,
Qinghe,
in the
out of
ancient
the secret
times,
passage.
the celestials
Just
were
as
in
they escaped the
charge.
range of the
They didn't
secret
cultivate
passage,
and only
Xiao
focused
Hua
on the
felt a
sun
kind of
and the
pressure
moon.
on his body.
Their bodies were
forcing him
powerful,
to land on the
and
ground.
they dominated for
Moreover,
a period of time.
A thick black
However,
thing rushed
in the
towards
end,
his body like
they
a
were
swarm
replaced
of
by the
bees.
Taoist sect,
and the
the
Yusha
Buddhist
could
sect,
only
the
block
Confucian
a
sect,
small
the
part
Sword
of it.
sect,
Looking
and
at Chun
other sections.
and the
Do
others
you dare to
again,
say that we can
their
compare
bodies were
to the
flashing
celestials
with
of
light,
the ancient
as if the
times?
light around them was
Seeing that
blocking the
immortal
black thing
Lu
around
Shi
them,
and
they were
Fairy
still
Ying
flying
were
about
deep
10
in
feet
thought.
away.
Sun
Xiao
Yunzi
Hua
took
can
the
you fly?
opportunity to say,
Xie Zhiqian
since this is
asked,
the case,
this is really
we should look for
strange. This is only
opportunities
the
while we
edge
are
of
at
the
death's
ink
door
Zhao
and find a
black
way
forest.
out for the Taoist
How did
sect.
Mo Zhao
During this
fly
period,
out from the middle
cultivation
to the outside?
resources
Junior
are the
can
most
fly,
important,
but it consumes a
Immortal
lot of
Lu Shi
magic
didn't have
power.
time to refuse.
Xiao Hua
So he
said
asked,
with a wry
fellow
smile,
cultivator Sun
Junior
Yunzi,
had better
what do
try
you
his
mean?
best to fly
Sun
below,
Yunzi calmly
and I hope to
said,
get rid of this
in
trouble
eyes
as
opinion,
soon as possible.
Our three sects
go.
should control
We'll go
the
and meet him.
majority of the
Zhu
spirit stone
Qinghe
veins
waved his
in the
hand
country of
and
Xi.
said,
Today,
Yes,
I invited
Chang
the two of
Yefeng
you
and
here
the
to
others
discuss
responded,
how to divide
and they all
the
flew
spirit
up.
stone veins
Xiao Hua
in the
didn't dare
country
to
of
release
Xi and
his
his
Buddhist
three
consciousness.
parts.
Then,
And his
we will
divine sense
divide
was
the
obviously
spirit stone
limited
veins
in
in
the
the
country
Zhao
of Xi
black
among the
forest.
three parts.
So he naturally had to hide his
Fairy
strength.
Ying clapped
After
her
flying
hands
for a
and
few
said,
miles,
I also
Zhu
have the
Qinghe
same
waved his
idea.
hand.
Although
And
this
Chun
matter
Yi
may
may
take
others
tens
hit on
of
a tall
thousands
black
of
tree,
years,
while
or
Xiao
even
Hua
millions
half
of years to
flew
come,
and half
now that
crawled
we
on
have
a
seen the
black tree.
opportunity,
Roar.
we should prepare
A roar
for the
that
future.
sounded like a dragon's
Sun
roar
Yunzi
and a
raised
wolf's
his
howl
eyebrows
could
and
be
said,
heard from a few
what
miles
does fellow
away.
cultivator
The voice of
Lu
the
Kong
cultivator
think?
who was
I don't
running
have
for
any
his
objection.
life could
When it
also
came
be
to
heard.
benefits, my
Immortal
fellow
Lu Shi
cultivators,
would
there
not
are two
refuse.
Mo Zhao behind.
However,
I
he
only
pointed
came
his
here
finger
because I
at
had no other
said
choice.
with a smile.
If you help me
Fellow
kill these two
cultivator
Mo
Sun
Zhao,
Yunzi,
I won't
you
take
have found a good
anything from
place.
you.
In
There are
fact,
more
I would
troublesome
like to
spirit
thank you for your
objects
help.
coming, so we can't
Zhu
stay here
Qinghe
for long.
snorted and didn't answer.
Sun Yunzi
In less than
scanned
half
with
a
his
cup of
divine
tea's
sense,
time,
and
waves
said
of
with a
black
smile,
waves rose up
sure
in front
enough,
of them.
Let's
And the
go.
black thing
Although the
unique to
location
ink
of our
Zhao
three
black
sects
forest was
is
thrown
not
into the air
suitable,
as if
there
it was
are
swept
many
up
other
by a
places.
hurricane.
There's
The
no
black
need to cause
forest,
trouble here,
which looked calm just a
after
moment
saying
ago,
that, was now
Sun
swaying
Yunzi
from side
turned
to
into a
side,
rainbow
as if it was
and
split
flew
by
towards
huge
the south.
wave.
Fairy
Xiao
Ying
Hua could even
and
hear the sound of
immortal Lu Kong
trees also
falling
used
to
their
the
divine
ground
powers
and
and left.
Hiss.
At the place
When
where
a cultivator and a
immortal
light green robe flew over. After a while, saw the huge desert scorpion chasing about 1,000 feet in size, and he couldn't help but with
gasp.
a yellowish body.
The
and some
Zhao
faintly
was
flickering dark
name.
runes.
Its whole
Easily
body was
drilled
pitch black
out of the yellow sand,
and it was even darker
its
than the black
huge
trees
poisonous
around it.
pincers were
Moreover,
shining
with
there was a
dim
kind of
light.
glossy gloss,
and its long
in the
tail
darkness.
was still
And
buried.
It was
in
obvious
the
that
yellow
the
sand.
skin of the MO
in a buried
Zhao
flower manner
was extremely
Xiao Hua
hard.
had been comprehending
Moreover,
the soul staff.
the MO
for several
Zhao
days.
was 30 feet
This
long
was a secret
and
method
3 feet
of
thick.
controlling
Its body
divine
was like a
sense,
black snake,
which was
but it
very
was different from a black snake.
However,
The front part of the MO
seemed to be
Zhao's
very
head had
familiar
an
with the
additional
art of
membrane
divine sense,
and there were bony
others might
forks
not be able to
protruding from
comprehend
the
this
membrane.
secret method.
At this
in their
time, it was
lifetime,
swaying
but he
back
had
and
gained
forth
quite a
as if it was
lot
angry.
in these few days.
The other parts of the MO
This
Zhao's
is the
head were
secret
similar
method
to a
of
snake's
ghost
head,
cultivators,
but its fangs were
I can actually
protruding
comprehend
out,
it by
and its
analogy.
fist-sized
Am I a
eyes were
genius?
flashing with red
Xiao
light.
Hua's little tail,
Looking at the tail
was raised
of the
again.
MO
However,
he
it was
immediately
indeed
thought
similar
himself,
to a python.
Damn it,
Did
it was
Chun
slightly
hate
thick,
the great
and it was in the
Manor
shape
Lord?
of a fish's
Did she go or
fin.
not? What
I don't know how
surprised Xiao
long I
Hua
have
the
to
most
wait.
was that there was a
Is
pair of
Shui
1 foot
in the
long
Haoming
wings
City
in the middle
waiting
of
for
the
me?
MO,
Or has
Zhao
she
thought.
safely arrived in the Haoming City? Thinking of
At
Chun-Yi's
this time,
magic
it was
power
flapping
as
up
a
and
middle
down,
gold core
and a
cultivator,
strong wind was
Xiao
stirring
Hua
up above
unconsciously
the pitch-black
felt
membrane.
a little discouraged.
It was somewhat similar to the wings.
He
of
knew
a
very
thunder
well
beast.
that this soul
Roar.
stab could indeed
The MO
surprise
Zhao
and
in front
wound the opponent's
roared
divine
angrily.
sense, and its
However,
tail swayed
it was
violently,
only effective
hitting the
against
black
opponents of the
trees
same
around it.
level.
The
or
extremely
similar
hard
divine
black
sense
trees were
range.
like firewood
If he fought
in the
against
face
Chun
of the MO Zhao's
not only
tail,
would the soul
and
stab
they would
not hurt
easily
her,
overturn.
it would even
The
backfire
MO
on him.
Zhao
Cultivation
flew
base,
into the air,
cultivation base,
and with the
realm,
flap of its wings,
they all need to be
flew
improved.
far away.
Xiao Hua
Tisk,
once again lamented
TSK?
about his time.
Xiao Hua was
However,
very impressed.
Xiao Hua didn't
He thought to
know
himself
that just as he was feeling
this MO
melancholy,
Zhao
there
is
were 4
indeed
gold
a
core
natural
cultivators
spiritual
sitting
creature.
casually
MO
in the Linlang
Zhao Black
Pavilion
Forest,
in the middle of
MO
the lake
Zhao
in a
Black
berry flower
Forest.
manor.
This is
Needless
the
to
nest
say,
of the
it was the
MO
beautiful
Zhao.
I don't know what kind of
Her left
amazing
hand
magical
was
powers
Zhu
it
Qinghe
has.
of the Su Yin
Just as
school,
Xiao Hua
and
thought
her
to
right
himself,
hand was a cultivator
MO
in
Zhao,
white clothes,
who was tailing
this
them.
cultivator
also
looked
roared
very
and raised his head
ordinary,
high, and even
Then
had a
he
bitter
suddenly
expression
stretched
on
his head
face.
forward and
A
spat
slanted
out
and
a
faint
swirling
scar
mass
ran
of
across the
black
back
gas,
of his ear,
which shot
and went
straight at the
cultivator
hair.
who was fleeing
This
in front of
cultivator
him.
also had
might
a
so
middle gold
powerful.
core cultivation
Xiao
base.
Hua's divine
Sitting below
thoughts
this cultivator
swept through the
was
area.
someone Xiao Hua
and he could see clearly that the
was
pitch
familiar
black mass
with. It
of
was
air was not
Xie
only
Jian
condensed
of the
by the
immortal
spiritual
ascension
energy
school.
of heaven and earth.
Chun erased
But
her
more
cup
importantly,
and said to the cultivator,
the special
in white,
black thing
Chang
in the
Yefeng,
MO,
fellow
Zhao Black
Daoist
Forest
Chang,
had
the
filled
Huan
the
country's
entire
rock border
mass of
sect
air.
is very
Moreover,
far away.
balls of different
Fellow
sizes
Daoist
were
Chang
condensed in
must
the
be
mass
tired
of air
after coming all the way
colliding
here.
and rotating.
Let me
with each
toast
other.
you.
Xiao
Chang
Hua's
Yefeng
divine
didn't have
thoughts
any
seemed
smile
to
on
be
his
attracted by
face.
the black thing
Although his words
in the
weren't
mass of
cold,
air.
they were still faint.
He raised his jade cup and said, "I don't dare. I received fellow Taoist Zhu's message a few
Chapter
years ago
1995.
and made preparations.
When the cultivator
I didn't
who was
expect
being
to wait
chased
for 6
saw
years.
MO
I
Zhao
thought this
spit
matter was
out
already
a
over.
strange mass of
But when I
black
received
gas,
the message,
his expression
I remembered
changed
this
drastically.
I rushed here in a
hurriedly
hurry,
waved his
so I'm not
hand,
tired.
and a magic
Please,
treasure that
Chen
looked like a
slightly
lotus
raised her
flew
cup
out of his
and
hand.
used her red lips.
It turned into a
to touch the
tricolored
jade
arc
cup
that protected his
Please.
back.
Chang
However,
Yefeng raised
as
his
soon
neck
as the
and
magic
drank
treasure
all
left
the
his
spirit
hand,
wine,
the black
jade
things
cup.
in the surroundings
He pointed his hand,
swarmed
and a
toward
strand
it,
of spirit
as if they were
wine
attracted
flew
to
out
it.
from the wine
In just
pot
a
next
moment,
to him.
the
and poured
tricolored
into the
arc
jade
absorbed
cup.
a lot of the black things.
And
When
its
the jade
brilliance
cup was
became
full,
somewhat dim.
Chang Yefeng raised his
Zhao's
head
mass
and looked
of
at
black
everyone.
gas was
He
like
was a bit
fish
puzzled
swimming
said,
in the dark
when I heard
forest.
fellow Taoist
And it
Zhu's
quickly
message,
dived into
I
the
thought that if we were
tricolored
going to
arc
that place,
with a loud
we would have
bang.
some help.
The tricolored
But today,
arc collided
it
with
seems
the
like it's
mass
just
of
the
black
four of
gas.
us.
And
Isn't it a
huge
bit weak?
force stretched the arc extremely long. With another bang, the mass
Chapter
of black gas broke through
1987.
the arc
Hey,
and
what
smashed
kind of powerful
into the
help do you
cultivator's
want?
back like a
Zhu
meteor.
Qinghe,
My
my
fellow
fellow
cultivator,
and
help
said,
me.
Could
When
it
the
be that you
cultivator
want to see
saw
the
that his
golden
magic
core
treasure
stage
was
cultivator
easily
from the kingdom of
destroyed,
Shi, he
where the
panicked.
golden core
However,
stage
it was obvious that this was
cultivator
not
from
the
the kingdom
first
of
time
man
it had been destroyed.
Mm.
Where
Therefore,
the golden
he turned
core
his
stage
body nimbly
cultivator from the
and
Utopia
pounced on
faction.
Zhu Qinghe,
That's not it.
who was standing on
Chang
his left.
Yefeng said,
The mass of
if
black
there's them,
gas
how can
was
I have a
originally
share?
going to pounce
I think
on the
you won't be able to
cultivator,
hold your
but because of
position
the sudden
as the
change in
manager.
the cultivator's
But that
body,
place is
it
dangerous
could not
after all.
completely catch
Even
up with
nascent
him.
soul stage
Instead,
cultivators
it made a
may
slight
be in
turn
danger.
and
The
smashed
four of us
into
don't
Zhu
have
Qinghe.
much confidence,
Damn
right?
it. Zhu Qinghe
You worry too much,
did not expect
fellow
the
Chang,
cultivator to be
Xie
so
Jiqian
insidious.
smiled and said,
He did not even wait
fellow
for the
Taoist
cultivator's
Zhu
name
has already
to be
talked to
introduced.
this,
Yeah.
He
He
has
did
been
not
to that
even
place
give any
and has
warning.
retreated succeeded in
The cultivator brought the disaster to him.
There are some places
and he
that
could
can't
not
be
help
passed
but
through
feel
without
angry.
special items.
However, to tell
when
you
the
the
massive
truth,
black
fellow
gas was
Taoist,
about to hit him,
this
he
could
has
not
also
care
made
less.
some preparations.
He shook his
over the
Taoist
years.
robe.
If these
and raised his
preparations
right
aren't
hand
enough,
from it.
we
At
can
this
just
time,
return
Zhucheng's right
What can we
hand had a
lose?
faint golden
That's
color,
right,
fellow
which was
Chong.
particularly
fellow
obvious
Chong.
in the dark forest.
Fellow Chong.
This faint
even
golden
fellow
color
Chong,
repelled
who
the
is at the
black
early
things
stage of the
outside,
golden core
and it could not be
stage,
absorbed.
wants to give it a try.
Kill.
Why
Zhu
you have
Ching
so
He
many scruples?
shouted in a low voice
Could it be that you're
and swung his
inferior
right
to a
arm
woman
straight
like me?
down?
Chen
A
Yi
golden
took the opportunity
brilliance
to laugh.
Appeared from his hand like a
That
sword.
place is one of the top
and it
10
slashed
directly
directly at the
places
mass of
in the
black
Xiaoyu
gas
continent.
that was coming toward
It
it.
has always been
A buzzing
fierce
sound
place.
was heard.
If I didn't
as
have
the
a
sword
heart
of
of light,
fear struck
I'm
the black
afraid it's
gas.
impossible for
It
me
sounded like
to
the buzzing
cultivate
of a hornet
until now.
The golden
However,
brilliance,
since you've already
circulated
made
at
such a
extremely
comprehensive
fast
plan,
speed,
and I've also
it was as if
made
the sword light
sufficient
was cutting the
preparations.
black gas.
What's the
with a
harm in
saw,
breaking
at the
into
same
that
time?
dangerous place?
The force of the mass
Chang
of black
Yafeng
gas
still said
bent
lightly.
the sword light.
However,
Zhu Qinghe's
before
Taoist
taking
robe
action,
and
we
hair
should
were
discuss
blown
all the
backward.
countermeasures.
His right
clearly.
arm trembled
Yes,
slightly.
what fellow
and his
Chang
whole
said
body
is
was
moving
very
back
reasonable.
inch by inch.
Xie Jiqian
Bill ahead,
clapped his
Chun,
hands
help me,
and said,
Zhu Qinghe's
I
Dharma
also
power
took some time to
was
check the
rapidly
ancient
depleted.
books.
When he saw the
Fortunately,
other
I obtained
Mo
some
Zhao
records
in
of
the
that
distance,
competition.
raised her head
I think it
high
must be the
again.
place that
He
fellow
knew
Chang
things were
mentioned.
not going well.
Oh,
and
he
he
immediately
Zhu
shouted.
Qinghe was overjoyed.
Fellow cultivator
and
Zhu,
said,
wait a moment.
It's really
When
a
Chun
famous sect.
Yi heard
the immortal
Zhu Qinghe's
ascension
cry for
sect
help,
actually
she
has
waved her
such a
hand.
secret
After a
record
ray
of
of
the
light
competition.
flashed.
What's in it?
A string of
Xie
floating
Jiqian
flower
said with a
petals
smile.
flashed in the
It's
air
not much,
and fell on the
it's
mass
just some
of
guesses
air
of some
like a
seniors in
fairy
the sect.
scattering
However,
flowers.
these
When the
guesses are in
petals
line
touched
with
the
what
mass
fellow
of
Chang
black
said.
gas.
They are in line
All
with
the
some
petals
things
turned
that I
into
prepared.
rotating flying
Seeing that
swords,
Xie Jiqian didn't
stabbing
say
into
more,
the mass of
Zhu
black
Qinghe
gas
didn't
from all
insist.
directions.
He nodded
Boom,
and said,
boom, boom.
Chang
There was
Yafeng
another
is
burst of
indeed
noise.
a secret
After
sect.
the roaring noise
Not many
subsided,
people know about
there was a
it,
soft
and
poof sound.
These people have
First,
already died.
it came from Zhu
so there are no
Qinghe's sword
records.
light.
There are
Then,
no records
the
at
air
all.
mass
It's that
seemed
your
to be
sect has
pierced
some guesses.
everywhere.
It's just that. Sounds were
Xie Jiqian looked
incessant.
around
At the
and
same
said with a wry
time,
smile,
the black things
we
that
seem
had
to be missing a
condensed in
fellow
black clumps
cultivator.
once again
Chang
flew
Yafeng
out
Chang
in all directions.
Chang of Chang Chang.
Not
fellow
only did they
Chang,
attack
Chang
Zhu
Qinghe,
Chang of Chang
and
Chang,
Chen
Chang
Yi,
Chang,
have
but they
Chang
also
Chang.
attacked the cultivator
Chang Chang
who had lured
Yafeng
the
nodded
source of
and
the trouble
said,
to the side.
several years ago,
when I was looking
Zhu
for the
Chenghe
fire
and
others
king in the
roared,
flame forest
and the
swamp,
flying swords
I
in their
met Jin
hands
Yi
were
of the
waved again.
thunder-controlling sect.
Zhen Yi is a cultivator.
The flying
at the early
swords
turned into
stage of the gold
stars
core realm,
and stabbed.
although
on the
his
black
cultivation
balls.
is not
These
high.
black balls were
He must
much
be
easier
proficient
to deal
in the
with
thunder
than the mass of
escaping
black gas.
technique of the
After the sword
thunder-controlling
light
sect.
passed,
They
his
turned
flying
into
speed
black fog
must be faster
and
than ours.
scattered in the air
That
of the
day,
black forest.
I gave him the communication
Zhu
charm
Qinghe
and the
scanned
location
the
of the
fleeing
buried flowers
cultivator
manor
with
in
his
exchange
divine
for the
sense.
heavenly ingress.
The
cultivator
that fellow
didn't even
Chang
look
Yafeng
back.
mentioned.
With a wave
I haven't
of his
received
sleeve,
any
a
messages
faint
from him in the
green
past few
brilliance
years,
spread out.
and manor
A
head
wooden stick
Chun
hasn't
hasn't
seen him come
and
visit.
scatter the black balls.
His figure
I'm
continued to
afraid
fly
that he isn't
behind
interested
Zhu
in the
Qinghe
heavenly
and the
ingress.
As if he
Just
didn't
now,
care
on the
about
way
the
here,
situation,
I was
Zhu
muttering
Qinghe
whether I should
and
go to the
others were.
thunder-controlling
Zhu Qinghe
sect
was
to invite a
furious.
cultivator here.
He had thought of this
Before
long
Xie
ago,
Jiqian finished
but he was
speaking,
afraid that the
Zhu
secret
Qinghe
path would
and
be
Chang
exposed.
Yafeng both said,
So he had no
"Don't."
choice.
I'm
but to come
afraid
out
it's
and
not
help.
appropriate for
At
a
this time,
disciple of
he was
the
with Chun
thunder-controlling
Yi
sect
and others
to participate.
They were too big of a target.
Xie Jiqian nodded and
they could
said,
not be compared
"Yes, I was
with
thinking the
fleeing
same
thing.
cultivator.
Therefore,
They would
I didn't
definitely
say
be chased
anything in
by
the jade
Mo
slip
Zhao.
that I gave Jin.
Villa Master
I only
Chun,
mentioned the
fellow
location
cultivator
of the
Chun,
heavenly ingress.
fellow cultivator Xie.
Chen Yi didn't say
Zhu
anything.
Qinghe did not
She
think
just
too
looked at the
much
three
and
of them.
said,
When
"Since
they
we
stopped
have
talking,
met Mo
she
Zhao,
smiled and said,
it is a chance.
fellow Taoists,
We are
Xie,
confident
you don't
that
mean
we
what you
can
say.
defeat him."
Huh? Well
What do you
said.
mean?
Chen Yi
Manor
squinted
Head
her eyes
when
when
she
Xie
saw
Jiqian
Mo
asked curiously.
Zhao.
Fellow
She knew
Taoists,
that
Xie,
Mo Zhao
you didn't
was full
see
of
Zhen Yi
treasures.
in the flame
Usually,
swamp, right?
Mo Zhao
Chen
would
Yi
hide in
said
the
with a
depths of the
smile.
Black Forest.
Yes.
but she would not
How
dare
did
to
fellow
enter.
Taoist Chen
How
know?
could she not be happy?
Could it be that
when
fellow
Mo
Taoist
Zhao
Chen Yi
delivered
came?
himself to her?
Xie Jiqian
I will team
said
up with
happily.
fellow cultivator
Manor
Chun.
Head Chen
Why
Yi
didn't you
shouted
say
and
so
flew
earlier?
forward.
She
She
waved her hands,
Jin Yi can't come.
and clusters
He already
of flowers
died in
flew
the
out.
flame
The
forest
flowers
swamp.
were rainbows
Chen Yi
formed
said
by
with
the
a
sword
smile.
light. However,
Okay,
one
Chang
of his martial
Yafeng,
nephews
who was
came
not
to the
far away
buried
from
flowers
Chen Yi,
manor for the
was
heavenly
already on guard.
ingress.
When he heard
Chun Yi's
Xie
words,
Jiqian
he
nodded
did not say
disappointedly.
anything.
He
I know.
coordinated with
It's the
Chun
Foundation
Yi's
establishment
and the
cultivator
huge
that I
sword in his
entrusted
hand,
the jade
which
slip
was more than
to.
10 feet
I think his
long
name is
and
Hua,
half a
foot
or something.
wide, slashed
Xiao
through the
Hua.
air.
Chun,
It was like a
he
door
said,
plank.
he's in the
and
buried flowers
flashed
manor
toward
right
Mo
now.
Zhao.
Oh,
Who was
not
closest
only
to them.
Xie Jiqian.
I'm coming
But
too.
Zhu Chenghe
Xie Jiqian
and
shouted
Chanya
and
Feng
flew
were
up
also
with Zhu
surprised.
Chenghe.
They said with a smile, the heavenly Yin grass didn't attract
A flying
a
sword
useful
flew
golden
out from his
core
hand like a
cultivator.
meteor.
Instead,
and pierced the
it
right
attracted
eye
a
of the
useless
other Mo
foundation
Zhao
establishment
roar.
cultivator.
The two Mo Zhao
Yes,
were
he was
angry.
interested in the
Mo
heavenly
Zhao
Yin
that had been
grass's
accumulating
ability
power
to
flapped its
neutralize
wings
Yin
and
opened
yawned.
its mouth.
He wanted to
spit
use
out
the
a cloud
heavenly
of
Yin
black
grass
gas
to
to
help
help
his
his
junior
junior
sister
sister
the other
build her
Mo
foundation.
Zhao opened its
Chun,
mouth
he
and
explained
spat
with a
out
smile.
2 clouds
Like
of
I
black
said,
venom,
the heavenly
which turned
Yin
into sharp
grass
arrows
is indispensable for
flying sword that
cultivators
was
with
coming
thunder
toward them.
attribute constitutions.
Don't take it head on.
It's impossible that Zhen Yi
quickly
didn't come.
reminded
Xie
Xie
Jiqian said
when he
with a
saw that the
smile.
flying sword
However,
was close to the venom.
Xiao Hua,
fellow
is just a
cultivator
foundation
Zhu,
establishment
please
cultivator.
know that Eyes
Even if he
flying
knows the
sword
thunder
has.
escape technique,
Xie
Jiqian
Jiqian
did not take it seriously. He smiled and was about to
Indeed,
explain when he heard
if we
a
bring
sizzling
such a
sound.
burden with us,
Xie Zhiqian
who
was
knows
shocked
what will happen
when he saw that
it's
the
not
Immo
appropriate.
Zhao's venom
Zhu
had
Qinghe
eroded
also
the
objected
brilliance
around
Chun
the
Yi
flying
said with a
sword.
smile.
The
I just
brilliance
made a
of the
deal with
flying
him.
sword had
If there's a
become
chance to
much
pick the
dimmer.
heavenly ingrass,
Xie
I'll
Zhiqian
give
did
it to
not
him.
dare to be
I don't plan to
careless.
bring him with
He
me.
recited the sword
He,
formula
Chang Yifeng
and
laughed
retrieved
at this moment.
the flying sword.
In my opinion,
He scanned it with
if
his
Xiao
divine
Hua
thought
really knows
and
the
saw that the
thunder escape
3-inch
technique,
long
we
flying
might as well
sword
bring
was
him with
covered
us.
with black spots.
Maybe he'll be useful.
It looked like a
What do you
rusty
think, fellow
iron
Taoist?
sword. Fellow
Taoist
cultivators,
Chang,
you mean
the
Immo
Xie
Zhao's
Zhiqian
venom
blinked
is
and
mixed
didn't
with the
say what he
black
meant.
sand. in
Zhu
the
Qinghe
black
looked at
forest.
Chun
It is
thoughtfully.
extraordinary.
Chun Yi's reaction
Zhu Qinghe
was also
smiled
strange.
bitterly.
She
It is
glanced
the
at Zhu
nemesis of my
Qinghe
flying
and then
sword.
looked at the wine cup.
If it were not for the
She
fact
didn't
that
say
the Immo
anything,
Zhao could
as if
not
there was
spit
some
out too much
heaven-defying
venom,
Taoist
we would have to run
magic
away
in the wine cup.
As Zhu Qinghe
I still don't
spoke,
think it's appropriate.
2 clouds of
Zhu
brilliance
Qinghe thought
flew
for
out
a
from his
moment
hand and
blocked
in
and
front of
shook his
him.
head. And
This
Xie
matter
Zhiqian.
involves
The brilliance was
I'm afraid
slowly
to be
annihilated by the
if fellow
Immo
Taoist
Zhao's
Xie
venom.
and
However,
fellow Taoist Chang
due to the
didn't
brilliance,
insist, the
I
venom was
definitely wouldn't say
completely
anything.
consumed.
This Xiao Hua is a
Immo
disciple of
Zhao
the Imperial
seems to be
Thunder
trying
sect.
to escape.
If he has some
Zhu
secret
Qinghe
methods,
was
to
about
tell
to
his
talk
master
to
about
Xie
this matter.
Zhiqian.
If
When
the
he
Imperial
scanned the
Thunder
area
sect with his
or
divine
even his
thought,
master interferes,
as expected,
what we can
Immo
get
Zhao
will be much less.
who had spat out the
Or
venom
maybe it'll be
earlier,
like
saw that
drawing
both
water
the venom
with a
and the
bamboo
air
basket
mass
were ineffective.
Xie Zhiqian,
Moreover,
and Chang
there were
Yifeng
4
heard
powerful
this and felt
cultivators in
somewhat
front of him.
dissatisfied.
He quickly
They
flapped
opened their
his
mouths,
wings
but
and
didn't
turned
say
his
anything.
body nimbly,
Chun
as if he was about
who
to
hadn't
fly
said
away.
anything, said at this time, according to Xiao Hua, he's a rogue cultivator, and his master is only at the late stage
Chapter
of the Foundation
1996.
establishment realm. Zhu Qinghe had noticed it, and Chun Yi was even more aware of it. Her flying swords had already landed. What does Manor Lord Chen mean?
Zhao's body?
Zhu Qinghe frowned.
The flying swords
seemingly
created a series
puzzled.
of sparks.
Manor Lord
on
Chen
Immo
means to
Zhao's
ignore
black
this
body,
disciple,
but they could not
called
hurt
Xiao
Immo
Hua.
Zhao at all.
Chang Yifeng said
he
with
could
a smile,
not allow the
since he's a
fatty
loose
meat in her
cultivator
mouth to
and his
escape.
master.
She rubbed
is
her
only
hands,
in the late
and more
stage
peanuts
of the
flew
Foundation
out.
establishment realm.
Moreover,
he's just a
Chun
little
Yi opened her
disciple
mouth
in
and
the
spat
Imperial
out a
Thunder
cloud of
sect
pink
with no
mist.
backing. It
What could he
suddenly
possibly
expanded
reveal?
in the air and
However,
turned into a light
since he
veil.
doesn't have any
It
background,
covered Immo
then
Zhao from top
he
to
naturally
bottom.
can't know
Immo
the
Zhao
lightning
flapped his
escape
wings,
technique
right?
and flew away.
Zhu Qinghe's
However,
brows relaxed
as soon as he cast
and he
out
said
the
with a
light
smile,
muslin,
my
a
Suyin
strong
school has
restrictive
plenty
force
of
was
such generated
disciples.
and firmly
While we need
restrained
him
them.
there,
It was as if a
That's true.
huge hand had
Xie
grabbed
Zhiqian
him.
nodded.
Roar.
After pondering
Immo
for a moment,
Zhao was
he said,
furious,
but Jin Yi
he tried
took
his
him
best
to
to
twist
twist
his
his
body.
body for a swamp.
His 2
I'm
fin-like
afraid
tails
this
were
guy
suddenly
is
lifted
riding
up
on Jin
and
Ye's
drew
thigh
2
and has
black
received some
shadows in the
benefits
air.
from Zhen Yi.
He almost swept the
Isn't
black
that
wood
simple?
that Xiao
Chun Yi
Hua
said with a
was
smile,
climbing,
call
and
Xiao
hit the
Hua
light
over
veil's
and ask him.
magical weapon
If he knows
from
the
the side.
lightning escape
Puff, puff.
technique, bring
Two
him along.
soft sounds
There are some
rang
places
out
where he
as
can
the
still
2
use
hammers
it.
smashed
Zhu
into the
Qinghe
veil.
looked at the
The
three
light
of them,
on the veil
calculating
immediately
in his heart.
dimmed. He
And
understood
Chun Yi's
very
face
well that
flushed
even
red.
if Xiao
Don't
Hua
worry,
knew the
Villa
lightning
Master
evasion
Chun.
technique,
I will help you.
he was still only at
Zhu
the Foundation
Qinghe smiled
establishment stage.
bitterly in his heart.
His flying
Chun
speed
Yi was
couldn't
too
possibly
greedy.
be faster.
Not
than
only
that.
did she not
However,
wait for him to take
since
out
the
his
3
Dharma
of them
treasure,
had the same
but
intention
she also
and had
wanted
their
to
own
trap
plans,
the 2
he didn't
Immo
feel like
Zhao.
saying anything
That was why
more.
she was hit by the
All right,
powerful
call Xiao Hua
force
over
of the
and ask
Immo
him.
Zhao.
If he really
However,
has
the moment
superhuman
Zhu Qinghe
flying
activated
technique,
the bring him
3
along.
Dharma treasures
Zhu
in a
Qinghe
storage
nodded
bag.
and looked at Chun.
Immo Zhao
also
did
wants to
not
get the
fly
heavenly
away.
ingress.
Instead,
it's
he
always
dived
good
into
if
the
he can
ground
help.
and disappeared
Hearing
into the
Chun
dark
Yi call
ground
him to
in
the
a
Lin
flash
Lang
of
Pavilion,
light as he
Xiao Hua
dived
was
into the
pleasantly
ground.
surprised.
Earth escaped.
His little heart
Xiao
was
Hua was
beating
stunned.
wildly.
Go after him.
His trip to the burial
Chun
flower
Yi
manor
waved
was
her hand,
really
and the
too
pink
smooth.
veil fell
Not
into
only
her
did he
hand,
obtain some
she
benefits,
shouted softly.
he only had to take
and
out
the
some
colorful
ancient
light
secret
around her
method
body
to use
flashed.
poison to counter
It seemed
poison.
that she was going to
And he was
chase
able to exchange
after
it for
Immo
the sky
Zhao.
ingrass
Villa
that
Master
Shue
Chun
urgently
Zhu
needed.
Qinghe
He was really
whispered,
lucky.
The
Xiao
5
Hua
elements
even
escape
couldn't help
skill
but
is
touch the
useless
peacock
in
illusion
Immo
on his chest.
Zhao Black Forest.
However, when he
Alas,
saw the golden
Chun
core
Yi suddenly suddenly came to an understanding when she heard this. Xiao Hua was slightly
and she slapped herself on the
He
forehead
hurriedly greeted
and laughed
Chun
bitterly.
Yi first.
I was in a hurry,
then greeted them
forgot
one
about
by
this
one
matter
according to their cultivation
immediately
level.
after.
Finally,
the five-colored
when he greeted
brilliance
Xie
around
Zhiqian,
Chun,
he
said
gradually
apologetically,
disappeared,
Senior
revealing
Xia,
Chun Yi's
Junior was unable
embarrassed
to deliver
and
the
angry
jade slip
expression.
to Marshal
Ahem.
Uncle Junior.
Juching a cough,
Junior
and
has
said,
failed Senior's trust.
even if Villa Master Chun
Haha, it's
knows
okay.
the rare 5
Xie
elements
Zhiqian
escape
laughed.
skill,
How
I'm
can
afraid
anything
that
in
he
the
is no
world be
match
perfect?
for Mo
On the
Zhao,
other hand,
who is born
fellow
with the Earth
Taoist
escape
Zhun
skill.
Ye's death has
We are not
truly
fated to
exceeded
fight
I's Mo
expectations.
Zhao today.
My Dawnrain
He,
continent has
Manor Lord
lost
Chun,
another
you
fellow
don't have to
Taoist
regret it.
that we can work
Chang
together
Yefeng
with.
held the
Even
giant
though the
sword in his
flame-forest
hand
swamp
and
was
said
a
with a
dangerous
smile,
place.
If
And
a
Mo
golden
Zhao
core
is
cultivator
rarely
was
captured
a little
in the
more
Black
careful
Forest
because it
it
can
might not be
escape.
a big deal.
Unless you use
I didn't
the
expect
talisman
fellow
that
Taoist
condenses
Chun
the
to be
ground into
Xiao
toughness
Hua smiled
at the very
apologetically.
beginning. Junior
prepared
is a
for
foundation
M.O.
building
Zhao's
cultivator.
sudden appearance.
Junior isn't clear about Marshall
Qian
Uncle Zhen's
smiled
matters.
bitterly.
At
At
this
this
point,
point, I merely followed
everyone
him
thought of the
flame
cultivator
force
who
wall.
lured him.
By the time I found
here
Marshall
and
Uncle
looked in the
Zhao,
direction that
he had
the
already
cultivator had
died.
fled.
Alas,
Unfortunately,
what a tragedy.
other than the pitch
price
black
of us
sky
cultivators
and the branches of
changing
the
the
heavens,
where were
and
the
changing
figures
our
of
lives is
cultivators?
indeed not
AI,
cheap.
let's go.
Seeing
Seeing
that
how
Xiao Hua
Hua
was
was
unwilling
unwilling
to
to
speak
speak
and said,
Xie
just
Qian
treat it as
didn't
being a
ask
good
any
person
further,
this time.
and shook his head with a
If I
sigh.
see this cultivator next
Senior
time,
Xie is
I
a
will
blessed
definitely
person.
kill him without
Previously,
saying
you
anything.
returned safely
Chen
from
Yi
Flame
said
Forest
angrily.
Swamp.
However,
And this time,
before she could
you were
finish her
treated with
words,
Villain Master
a familiar
Chen and
voice
Senior
came
Zhu.
from afar.
It's truly
Fellow
worthy of
cultivator,
celebration.
help me out.
Xiao Hua smiled
Xiao Hua was
and
stunned.
bowed towards
Wasn't it the
Chun
cultivator
Yi
who had
and the
escaped
others.
just now?
Junior
This
congratulates
guy
you.
dares to
Haha.
come back?
Xiao Hua,
Xiao
you
Hua was
misunderstood.
extremely surprised.
Chun Yi rolled her
He had
eyes
never thought
and
that
waved
there would
her
be
hand.
such a shameless
We haven't gone
cultivator
yet.
in the world.
We've made you wait
However,
for these past
before
few
Xiao
days.
Hua could speak or look at
Xiao
the
Hua was
expressions
slightly
of Chun
stunned
Yi
and
smiled
others.
apologetically.
Zhuching his countenance instantly.
Junior
went
thought that
ghastly
seniors
pale.
had already returned safely. So Junior was asked to come over.
He slapped his
May I
hand
know, and withdrew
why did you call Junior
4
over it this
jade
time?
slips from his storage
Xiao Hua,
pouch.
do
And
you
his
know the
divine
lightning
sense
evasion technique?
swiftly wrote something
Xie
on
Qian
them.
asked with
After
a
that,
smile.
he waved
This,
his hand, and the
Xiao Hua
jade
was somewhat
slips
puzzled.
flew towards
He muttered in his
Chun
heart
Yi
and was
and
very
the others,
hesitant.
and he
Haha,
cried
Xiao
out.
Hua.
Fellow
Chun Yi
Taoists,
clapped her hand
this is the
and
place
took out
we're
a
heading
jade
to.
slip.
If
She
any
placed it in
fellow
front of her
Taoist
and
said
said
with
with
a
a
smile,
calamity.
just
Then
now,
you can meet up
this
here.
old woman
Everyone,
and fellow
please
Taoists
take care of
calculated
yourselves.
that the heavenly
After
yin
that,
grass is
Zhu
really
Qinghe
difficult
took
to
the lead,
obtain. And
this
this old
flew
woman
toward
also
the place
doesn't
where
need the
M.O.
heavenly yin
Zhao
grass.
had disappeared.
So I don't want to risk my
Zhu
life
Qinghe
for
was
this
very
jade slip.
fast,
But
however,
Chun-Yi
since
and
he followed
Chang
fellow
Yefeng
Taoists
were not
Xie's
slow
jade
either.
slip,
The
to
two
my
of them
burial
also
flower
scanned the
manor.
distance
It can be
with
said
their
that you have
divine
fate with
senses.
us.
And an
This
incredulous
old woman
expression
thought
that if you
appeared on
know
their
the
faces.
lightning evasion
Before Zhu
technique
Qinghe
and can
could
help us
throw
at a
the
crucial
jade
time,
slip to them,
you can
had
casually
already
obtain
flown into the air,
heavenly yin
grab the
grass
jade
without
slip
me
with their
doing
hands,
anything, and put it into their storage
even if you
bags
have some
without even
difficulties
looking
at
at
that time.
Then
fellow
they
Taoists
turned into
yeah,
streaks of light.
This old woman will
disregarding
definitely
the
not
dangers
stand
of
by and
ink
watch
shadow
because of your
black
efforts.
forest. Of
And
course, if you don't
Xiao
know
Hua
the
took the
lightning
jade
evasion
slips
technique,
and
your
immediately
cultivation
released
is
his
just a
Buddhist
child
thought.
in our eyes.
However,
it's fine if
before
you
his
don't
Buddhist
go.
thought
You could take
could
back
reach
this
far.
jade slip yourself.
A suffocating
The deal
feeling
that this
came
old
from
woman
afar.
said a few
It was like the
days ago
momentum of
can't be
10,000
fulfilled.
horses
Ah,
galloping in
this.
the air.
Xiao Hua looked at the jade
Xiao
slip
Hua
with a
trembled.
somewhat
He
dumbfounded
knew that there must be a
expression.
change.
He didn't
in
know
the
what to
M.O.
say.
Zhao Black
It's better to
Forest.
rely on
When he
yourself
released his
than
Buddhist
others.
thought for more
Chang
than 10
Yefeng
miles,
also said
he
with
saw
a
that there
smile,
seemed to be a
this Chang's
huge
master
wave
has
in the
always
Black
taught I
Forest.
this in my early
The
years.
black sand was
Now,
lifted high.
I will also
was
use
more than
this
10
to
feet
encourage you.
high.
Instead
Moreover,
of letting fellow
under the
Taoists
waves of the
Chen
black
help you,
sand,
it's
many
better for you
spirit
to
beasts
harvest it yourself.
and even spirit birds.
Of course,
and some
the premise is
cultivators
that
were
you have the
fleeing in
ability
panic.
to do
While
so.
Xiao Hua was
Xiao Hua
watching,
really didn't want to
two
cooperate
cultivators in the
with
late
these
stage
golden
of
core
foundation
state
establishment were
He simply
swallowed
couldn't
by the
take
black
any
sand in the
advantage.
blink of an eye because their flying speed
Let's not
was
talk
not
about other
fast
things.
enough.
Just take
Moreover,
this matter as an example.
The spiritual chi
Chun
of
Yi returned
heaven
the jade
and
slip
earth
to him
in the waves of the
But what
black
about the
sand
secret
was
technique?
extremely
It
chaotic.
had been more than 10 days. Xiao Hua didn't think that Chun Yi would be like him in the past.
Xiao Hua's
She
Buddhist
obtained so
thought
many
could
jade
not
slips,
penetrate it,
but didn't
so
know
he
how
could
to
not
use
see
them.
whether the
She only cared
cultivators
about
were dead
cultivating
or
her own
alive.
technique. The black
and
sand
carefully didn't
moved
check them.
very fast.
Now that Chun
as
Yi
if
returned
following
the
the
jade
flow
slip
of
to
the
him.
spiritual
As
chi
long as he
of
took
heaven
it,
and earth, it would be like
it rushed
drawing water
several
with a
miles
bamboo
in
basket.
an instant.
Burial
At this
flower
time,
manor,
the panic
could be considered
Qian
as
released
a
his
wasted
divine
trip.
thought,
Thinking
and
about
found the
Shue's
abnormality.
bitterness
M.O.
since the
Zhao.
misty mountain
Why did I
and her
encounter something
calmness in the
that
face
would
of
not
death?
happen?
Xiao Hua's
tens of
heart was
thousands
somewhat
of
sour.
years?
If he could
After
do
saying
something
that,
for his
he did not
beloved,
even greet Xiao
even if it was a
Hua.
little dangerous.
His figure followed Chun
What was there to be
Yi
afraid of?
and the others,
Moreover,
and chased after
this
him.
young master
Xiao
is
Hua did
afraid
not
of you
dare
in
to be
this burial
negligent.
flower man.
His figure also swept
Outside,
up, but
no
he
matter
still
what dangerous
flew
place
very
it is,
low.
you don't have
Following
the initiative.
behind Xie
You also
Qian.
don't know
He
this
flew
young
while
master's
observing
methods.
M.O. Mo Zhao.
Why would this young
the ink
master be
storm
afraid
was
of
like
you?
an ocean wave.
Xiao Hua
surging
lowered his head,
forward violently.
thought for a moment,
Wherever
then
it went,
raised his head again.
everything in the
and
Black
said with
Forest would
difficulty,
be engulfed.
For seniors,
Moreover,
this junior's
the ink storm
practiced
was
some
like a
lightning
hurricane
escape technique,
stirring
but
up
it's only
all
the
the
hibernating
spiritual
lightning
energy
escape
of heaven
technique.
and earth.
It hasn't
All
been
the withered
successful
branches
yet.
and leaves
It's
in the
3
Black
times
Forest
faster
were
than
swept up
ordinary
high into the
foundation
sky.
establishment stage
Xiao Hua
cultivators,
observed for
but
a
in front
moment
of seniors,
and had a plan in
it's
his
still
heart.
not a big deal.
Although Mo Zhao
if this
was
junior
powerful,
goes,
His
I'm
speed
afraid
was still
I won't
slower
be able
than
to
his
help
bright
much.
thunder escape.
Alas,
If
that's
he
a
used
pity.
all his
Chun-Yi's
strength,
face was
escaping
full
would
of
not be a
regret.
problem.
She pushed her
However,
hand and said,
Chun-Yi
"This old
and the
woman
others were in
still
front of
wants
him.
to participate
If he ran
in the
too
dual
fast,
cultivation ceremony.
it was inevitable
between
that he would be
and your junior
discovered.
sister.
Therefore,
It seems
Xiao Hua thought for a moment,
rubbed his
and his
hands
direction was
and said with an
slightly
apologetic
slanted,
smile,
flying in another
"However,
direction.
since
Damn
seniors
it,
think
the world
highly
is
of this
really
junior
strange,
and want to guide
a
this
small
junior,
foundation
how can this
establishment
junior
cultivator
not
actually
move
ran
forward
to the
as
inner
long
layer
as
of the
seniors
Black
can take care
Forest?
of this junior?
Are you not afraid of being
This junior
by
will
Mo
definitely
Zhao?
go with you,
A
senior."
voice sounded from above.
Zhu Qinghe waved his hand.
Needless
and
to
said,
say,
"It was the
Xiao Hua,
cultivator who
tell me if you
lured
know how to
Mo
do it
Zhao
or not.
here." This
Xiao
old
Hua
man
did
wants
not
to
pay
see
much attention to him.
If you can't meet
He only
this
turned his
old
head
man's
slightly
requirements
and
and
saw
saw
that
that
it was a
short and fat
Senior,
gold core
please
cultivator.
consider.
His face
Xiao
was
Hua
shriveled
bowed
and
and said,
flat.
"Go,
Like a
Xie
rotten
Jiqian
persimmon.
waved his hand,
Moreover,
and
his
his
eyes
slender
were
light
extremely
flashed.
small.
A
and were
flying
embedded
sword
in the
flew
persimmon,
out from his sleeve
as
like
if they
a
could not
meteor
be seen,
and stabbed
"Give me your
toward
storage pouch.
Xiao Hua's
I will give you a
throat.
ride."
The
Xiao
cultivator
Hua was
looked at
shocked.
Xiao Hua.
His body just
and
wanted to
sneered.
dodge, but his heart
With your flying
slightly
speed,
moved. You will
his
be
whole
swallowed
body
by
flew
Mo
up
Zhao
and
sooner
quickly
or later.
retreated.
Not only
Directly
will your
flying
true
out of
origin be
Linlang
eroded,
Pavilion.
your storage
However,
pouch will also
the more
be destroyed.
Xiao Hua flew,
I will show you kindness.
the more he
and give you a
clearly
ride.
felt that the
If you are
railing
fated
of
to
Linlang
escape,
Pavilion was
it is
behind
better
him,
than your
but he
cultivation
couldn't get
being
close.
crippled.
And becoming an
ordinary
ordinary
person
was like a meteor,
instead of letting others
closely
benefit
pressing
from
in
his
front of
storage
his
pouch.
eyes.
Why
Looking
not
at
let me
that
benefit
posture,
from it? It seemed like it wouldn't stop
Xiao
until
Hua
it pierced his
roughly
throat.
understood and
Xiao
sneered.
Hua could
That is
only
my
use the
business.
hibernating
It has
thunder
nothing to do
escape,
with you.
according to his
Even if I
early
throw my
foundation
storage pouch
establishment
here
cultivation
and let other
and
cultivators
didn't reveal the
benefit,
slightest
I will
bit
not
of
give
his
it to a
cultivation.
scoundrel who
However,
wants to take advantage
the sword
of the
light in
situation.
front of him didn't
When
give
the
up
cultivator
and
heard
didn't stop
this,
at all. Not
Senior
only was he
Xia,
not angry,
Xiao
but he
Hua
laughed
helplessly
instead,
exclaimed and
"Rotten
said,
wood can't be
"This
carved.
junior's
You
cultivation
don't understand
can
shit.
only be like
Didn't
this.
I just lead
Please
Mo
forgive me
Zhao to your
Ha,
teacher's
ha, ha.
place?" Xie Jiqian
Think with your
laughed
ass.
loudly.
If your
and
teacher
waved
did
his
not
big
fight
sleeve.
with Mo Zhao,
The sword lights
you would have
circled
encountered
around
Mo
Linlang
Zhao long
Pavilion
ago.
and
Wouldn't
flew
you?
back.
Didn't
into
you
his
die
hand.
in
He said,
Mo
"Xiao
Zhao
Hua,
long ago?
your lightning
How can you
escape
still talk to
technique
me
is
here?
really good."
Seeing
The
such a
speed of your
shameless
flying
cultivator,
technique,
Xiao Hua
comparable
sighed
to this
inwardly
old man's.
and ignored him.
His
Xiao Hua
body
stopped,
tilted.
He was still at
and
the railing of
flew in another
Linlang
direction.
Pavilion.
Why are you
didn't
flying
fly
there?
out of the river
You
at
can
all.
only escape.
Xiao
by
Hua's
flying
face was
straight.
extremely shocked.
The short and
he looked
fat
around in
cultivator
disbelief,
said curiously,
and even raised
then
his
he
head
swept
to
back
look at
with
the
his
river
divine
outside.
thought and rolled his bean-sized eyes.
He praised with
He
admiration.
rubbed his hands and
Villa
threw a
Master
spell at
Chun.
Xiao Hua.
This junior
At the same
really doesn't know
time,
what to
his
say.
other hand grabbed
This
at the
formation
void,
is too
trying
mystical,
to scare away the
isn't it?
storage pouch.
He,
in Xiao Hua's
Chun-Yi's
heart
eyes.
wasn't arrogant.
You really
at all.
don't want to live
However,
anymore.
a trace
Xiao
of
Hua was not as
complacency
panicked as the
flashed
short
across
and
her
fat
face, and she
cultivator
said with a
imagined.
smile, "Nor was he
What is a
flying
little
around
foundation
absent-mindedly.
establishment cultivator like you know?
This is nothing more than
His
an
Buddhist sense
insignificant
saw
skill.
that the cultivator was actually
Admirable,
trying to kill him behind his back
Xiao
without
Hua
a
smacked
trace
his
of the
lips
demeanor of a
and
senior.
looked at Xie Jiqian
And he could
again.
not help
He
but
sighed
be
again.
furious.
Senior
His
Xie's
body
flying
suddenly
sword
stopped
doesn't
in
seem to be
midair,
much
and he
inferior
waved
to a
his
sword
hand,
cultivator's
using the
flying
earth
sword,
condensation
right?
technique.
Under this
Immediately,
flying sword,
an
this
oppressive
junior
force
simply doesn't have the
swarmed from
power
all
to
around
fight
the cultivator.
I really can only
Squeezing the
escape.
cultivator
Moreover,
tightly.
even if I did
young
escape,
man,
I wouldn't be able
your
to
temper is not
escape
small.
even if I exhausted
The cultivator
all
was
the
not
magic
afraid of
power in my
Xiao Hua's
body.
spell at all.
A core
and
formation
only
cultivator
the magic power
is
in his
really
hand.
unfathomably
He believed that Xiao Hua's
profound.
magic power
Unfortunately,
was definitely not
this
as
flying
deep as
sword
his,
still can't
and
compare
definitely not
to
as
a sword
fast as
cultivator.
a spell.
It lacks
However,
spirituality.
the instant the cultivator's
Xie
great
Jiqian spread out his
confinement
hand,
art
and a
smashed
half-foot
on a
long
Xiao
flying
Hua,
sword appeared
a
in
burst
his
of
hand.
brilliant
It was
light
covered in
flickered
flowing light
all over
and
Xiao
flying
Hua's
wings.
body.
It was
Runes to be
precisely
faintly
the
seen.
activation
It was
of the
extremely
protective
impressive.
brilliance.
Moreover,
Xiao Hua,
just
your
outside
flying
the
speed is
brilliance,
indeed not bad.
a layer of earth
Unfortunately,
yellow armor
it still
suddenly
doesn't meet
formed.
this old man's
Furthermore,
standards.
Xiao Hua's
Zhu
figure
Qinghe
suddenly
shook
shot
his
up,
head
as
feeling
fast
very
as a
regretful.
messaging talisman.
Fellow
The great
Taoist Jew,
confinement
Chang
technique
Yefeng
only
rushed to
smashed
speak
into
first.
Xiao Hua's
In my
lower
opinion,
body.
Xiao
Clearly
Hua
hitting
is already
nothing
not bad,
but air.
I approve of him going.
Protective brilliance.
Zhu Qinghe frowned
The
slightly
cultivator was
and looked at
stunned,
Chun Yi
and
again.
a bad feeling
Fellow Taoist
emerged in his
Jew.
heart.
Xiao
He
Hua
hurriedly
faced
shook
the flying
his two
sword
arms
and flew with his
outwards,
back facing,
as if he also
for him
wanted
to
to
be able
urge
to
the
dodge
protective
a
brilliance
core
to
formation
break
cultivators
free
from
from
Xiao
Xiao
Hua's
Hua's
such a
earth
long
condensation
time.
technique.
This method should be
Unexpectedly,
the Imperial
at this
Thunder
moment,
Sex.
the
Thunder
cultivator
evasion
suddenly
technique.
felt a sharp
In my
pain
opinion,
in his mind.
he should be able to go,
as if an awl
Chun
had
Yi
pierced
said
into
with a
his brain.
beaming smile.
His divine
Zhu Qinghe
thought
was helpless.
involuntarily
He flicked his
contracted,
sleeve and said,
and the magic
"All right,
power in his
then.
body,
Since all the
also
fellow
went out of
Taoists
control
agree,
at the same
then
time.
this Zhu
Therefore,
can only
the
agree."
cultivator could not help but cry out, "Oh!"
His two hands tried to support his head. Chapter 1997. Haha. Xiao Hua sneered.
The earth condensation technique had already hit the cultivator. The surrounding earth attribute heaven and earth spiritual chi swarmed over, binding the cultivator tightly. Xiao Hua's figure swept towards the cultivator again. He reached out and pulled down 2 huge storage bags from the waist of the cultivator, who fell from the air. He turned around and was about to escape. At this moment, Xiao Hua's gaze swept over and saw a green silk ribbon on the cultivator's neck. At this moment, the cultivator was panicking. The protective brilliance around his body flickered as soon as it was suppressed. Xiao Hua's heart stirred. He reached out and pulled out the green silk ribbon. On the green silk ribbon, there was a doll-like doll tied to it. That doll was only the size of a thumb. Its entire body was faintly green. A layer of faintly discernible green seal text appeared from time to time. It seemed to be floating on the outer layer, but also seemed to be hidden inside the doll. Looking at the doll again, its features were clear. Its eyes were tightly closed, and there was a trace of sadness at the corner of its mouth. It seemed to be full of sorrow. Sorcerer puppet. Xiao Hua was stunned. His eyes almost shrank. He almost didn't dare to believe his eyes. However, even if he saw the green seal text, he still didn't dare to believe it. After all, sorcerer puppets were legendary ancient objects. He had only seen them in Huang Yi's imprint. He couldn't be sure. Therefore, Xiao Hua didn't even think and hid the doll in his arms. He didn't even look at the cultivator, who fell on the ground. He turned around and fled. The eyes of the cultivator, who fell on the ground, were filled with regret, not only for provoking Xiao Hua, but also for his carelessness. He panicked because of his escape. In fact, his cultivation wasn't weaker than Xiao Hua's. It was only because of his carelessness that he felt that dealing with a baby like Xiao Hua didn't require much effort. But he really didn't expect Xiao Hua to have soul stab and earth condensation technique. He didn't care about dealing with Xiao Hua, but Xiao Hua was serious. He used a secret technique right from the start. Who was stronger and who was weaker? Naturally, it was clear. However, the cultivator simply didn't have much time to regret, nor did he have much time to break through Xiao Hua's earth condensation technique. The ink storm came charging over like it was covering the sky and covering the earth. Countless ink sand hit the cultivator's meridians like it was real, hitting the true essence within the meridians and the golden core that was the source of the true essence within the Dantian. The golden core was originally a faint yellow color, and it revolved in his Dantian. However, when a large amount of ink entered the golden core, the outer layer of the golden core was instantly dyed black. Soon after, a layer of fine black powder appeared on the surface of the golden core. When the black powder came into contact with the spirit chi, it immediately formed bubbles. The bubbles quickly burst, layer after layer. As the bubbles burst, the golden core shrank slightly. The cultivator was still struggling with all his might, but after being annihilated by the ink storm, his breath and surroundings were completely filled with the tyrannical ink sand. He was unable to extract the spiritual chi of heaven and earth, and could only use his Jindan to activate his mana. But at this moment, his Jindan had also been invaded by the ink sand. Not to mention that the vital essence in his meridians had been completely blocked by the ink sand, unable to activate his mana. Even if his meridians were intact, his Jindan would not be able to provide vital essence. As a result, the cultivator's face was deathly pale, and he no longer wanted to struggle. However, at this moment, the cultivator's body loosened. Xiao Hua's earth condensation technique was still unable to resist the might of the ink storm, and it collapsed under the might of heaven and earth. The cultivator suddenly rejoiced, and a trace of hope rose in his heart. However, before he could crawl up from the ground, a wind howled, and a piece of black wood as thick as a duck's egg flew through the hurricane, striking the cultivator's temple. The cultivator faintly glanced to the side, not panicking in the slightest. He waved his left hand, and an extremely simple object controlling technique was used, wanting to knock the black wood away. However, he extended his hand, but his mana was gone. His technique was nothing more than a superficial struggle. With a bang, that black wood struck the cultivator's temple, and a wisp of dark red blood flowed down from the cultivator's forehead. The cultivator's body swayed twice, and he fell to the ground, never to crawl up again. A golden core cultivator was killed by a black wood just like that. Xiao Hua took the other party's doll and threw the two huge storage bags into the space. His figure no longer hesitated, and he flew forward slightly crookedly. However, after flying for half a cup of tea's time, Xiao Hua felt that something was wrong. The amount of ink sand in the air was increasing, and with the agitation of the heaven and earth spiritual qi, the ink sand seemed to be affected. Moreover, as Xiao Hua flew, the surrounding black wood became thicker, and from time to time, there were some black vines bearing their fangs and brandishing their claws from the blackwood, as if to block Xiao Hua. This is bad. Xiao Hua suddenly realized that he was flying in the wrong direction again. The place where Chunyi flew to should be outside of the ink cloud black forest, and in order to avoid their eyes and ears, he diverted. Wasn't he flying to the middle of the ink cloud black forest? However, seeing that the ink cloud black forest was becoming more and more violent and had the power to sweep everything away, Xiao Hua wanted to fly in front of the ink cloud black forest again. My goodness, what should I do now? Xiao Hua's heart trembled slightly. On one hand, he was desperately trying to escape into the depths of the ink cloud black forest, and, on the other hand, his mind was spinning like a windmill, trying to find a way to escape. However, after thinking for a long time, Xiao Hua still could not think of a way to escape from the ink cloud black forest, even though Mo Bao's momentum and speed were increasing exponentially. Damn it, am I going to be buried in the ink cloud black forest? Xiao Hua sighed in his heart, but at this moment, a ray of light flashed in his heart. Ink cloud? That's right. Where did the ink cloud black forest go? I have been in the ink cloud black forest for a long time, but why haven't I seen a single ink cloud black forest? If there is no ink cloud black forest, will it still be a dangerous place? Xiao Hua came to his senses and lowered his head to look at the pitch-black ground. Ha ha! They're all underground. Xiao Hua's divine sense could not reach far, so when he used his Buddhist awareness to check, he really saw that under the pitch-black ground, there were many ink cloud black forests that were like hibernating snakes. They curled up into a coil and wrapped themselves with their fleshy wings. Well, the ground can block divine sense, so it should be able to block most of the ink cloud black forest. Since the ink cloud black forest has spread its fleshy wings, the fleshy wings should be able to block a part of the ink cloud black forest. As for the remaining ink cloud black forest, the ink cloud black forest should not be afraid of it. Xiao Hua understood, and his heart immediately calmed down. He formed a seal with his hands and used the earth escape technique. His body escaped into the pitch-black ground. However, in just a moment, Xiao Hua flew out from the ground again and said with a smile, I am stupid. The ink cloud black forest is extremely dangerous. Even a gold core stage cultivator has to be careful in fear of being attacked by the ink cloud black forest or other ferocious creatures. Now, because of the ink cloud black forest, all the ferocious creatures have escaped. Before the ink cloud black forest, who would dare not to escape? Isn't this a good time for me to go deep into the ink cloud black forest? If we don't go in now, what are we waiting for? Chapter 1998. Immediately, Xiao Hua took out the maze again and put on his body. His body stuck close to the ground and flew towards the depths of the black forest. Of course, Xiao Hua was also prepared. The 100 talismans in the rabbit array were already in his hand. He was only waiting for the time when he couldn't escape, then he would go deep into the ground and lay out the array. Xiao Hua's bright thunder escape was indeed powerful. He quickly rushed in front of Mo Bao like a warrior surfing the waves, standing on top of the waves. Those hiding under the ground were not only Mo Zhao and other monsters, but also gold core stage and nascent soul stage cultivators. These cultivators left their spirit sense outside to observe Mo Bao's whereabouts. At this time, they actually saw Xiao Hua's figure that was like a meteor. They couldn't help but be shocked. None of them didn't want to see Xiao Hua's true face. Unfortunately, their spirit sense didn't dare to be too far away. Moreover, Xiao Hua's maze also blocked their spirit sense. Even if they wanted to see, they couldn't. Which expert is this? He actually dares to fly like this in the Mo Zhao Black Forest? And his flying speed is so fast. The cultivators started to guess. Some were spirit-severing stage cultivators, some were nascent soul stage cultivators, and some even guessed that it was the Imperial Thunder sect. However, they never thought that under the maze, it was just a small Imperial Thunder sect and a small Foundation establishment stage cultivator in the Myriad Thunder Valley. Buzz, buzz, it seemed to be the sound of mountains shaking and the earth quaking, coming from the front of Xiao Hua's head. Xiao Hua tried his best to probe out with his Buddhist consciousness, but he could not find any clues. However, Xiao Hua understood in his heart that the ink cloud Black Forest must have produced an ink storm in the depths of the forest and was pushing out in all directions. Therefore, he didn't dare to delay any longer. He formed a seal and drilled into the ground. Moreover, he used all his spirit sense to go as deep as possible. After passing by dozens of Mo Zhao of different sizes, Xiao Hua finally felt a huge force starting to support him. He knew that he had almost reached the deepest part of the Earth escape, so he didn't waste any more spirit sense to go down. Instead, he hurriedly threw out the 100 talismans to lay out the rabbit array. Just after Xiao Hua threw out most of the talismans, a feeling of black clouds pressing down on the city rushed over from above. Good, it's still so powerful, even though it's so far from the ground. Xiao Hua was flabbergasted. He activated the magic power in his hand and waved it continuously. Finally, as the ink sand fell one after another, he grabbed his hand. The rabbit spell formation was activated one after another and blocked the oppressive aura. However, the formation was only able to block the majority of the ink sand. There was still an extremely small amount of ink sand that was able to penetrate through the gaps in the formation. It was sucked onto Xiao Hua's body. However, at this moment, the ink sand was not much worse than the ink sand that Xiao Hua had encountered at the edge of the ink cloud Black Forest. After entering his meridians, it was absorbed by the Yao milk. Although Xiao Hua did not release his Buddhist consciousness from the magic circle, he could see the flickering brilliance above the magic circle. It seemed like a lonely lamp in the waves that wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. Naturally, he also knew the brutality of the ink violence on the ground. Thus, he sighed and clapped his hand, taking out the doll that looked like a wizard puppet. Although it looks the same as the sorcerer puppet, I can't be sure. Xiao Hua stared at the doll and thought to himself, but this doll is obviously written in green seal script. It must be related to witchcraft. However, that cultivator is only at the peak of the early stage of the Golden Core realm. He has not reached the middle stage of the Golden Core realm. Where did he get the sorcerer puppet? Unfortunately, that cultivator was submerged by the ink violence. Now, I don't know whether he is dead or alive. Humph, such a shameless cultivator. He won't even let go of a small Foundation establishment cultivator like me. What's the use of keeping him alive in this world? Xiao Hua immediately curled his lips and placed the sorcerer puppet aside. Then, he took out the 2 storage pouches that he had taken from that cultivator from space. When he opened the storage pouches to take a look, he could not help but be stunned. There were a lot of things in the bag of holding, but there were no spirit stones, no medicinal pills, and no spirit herbs. There were only a lot of broken jade slips, some worn-out magic tools, magic treasures, and some inexplicable things. I understand. Xiao Hua slapped his forehead and said with a smile, "This guy is the same as the cultivator abandoned by the heavens." He came to the ink cloud Black Forest to look for cultivation techniques or magic treasure remains. It's just that this guy is really amazing. He actually collected so many things. Presumably, that sorcerer puppet was also found by him in the ink cloud Black Forest. Since that cultivator said that all storage pouches cannot escape the ink violence, then the ink sand must be able to corrode storage pouches. These things cannot be left in storage pouches. They must be exposed in the ink cloud black forest. Moreover, the ink sand will attack at any time. It is impossible for all magic tools and magic treasures to be intact. However, this cultivator is self-taught. He had the sorcerer puppet close to his body. Xiaohua glanced at the doll again and said with a smile, "It's just a pity that he doesn't know the method to refine the sorcerer puppet. It is useless for him to keep it. On the contrary, it is giving this young master a life." Xiaohua had seen the introduction and method to refine the sorcerer puppet from Huang Yi's Ghost Cultivation inheritance. He knew that this sorcerer puppet was an object refined by ancient witchcraft. It was incomparably miraculous. After refining it, it could be kept close to the body and could die once in place of the cultivator. As for why it was like this and how it was refined in this day, an age where witchcraft had long been lost, who would know? Even ghost cultivators with hundreds of thousands or millions of years of inheritance did not know. 2 white bones. Xiaohua scanned the area with his divine sense, and he saw 2 extremely long and thick white bones among the pile of junk. Xiaohua clapped his hands and took out the white bones from his storage pouch. He held them in his hands and observed them carefully. The white bones were extremely thick. Xiaohua's 2 hands could not close together. Moreover, the white bones were extremely long. Xiaohua was already tall and thin, but the white bones were actually more than twice as tall as him. Good heavens, these 2 white bones are actually compatible with the giant head in the space. Xiaohua's heart stirred. The true samadhi fire in his hands was ignited and burned the 2 white bones. As Xiaohua expected, not long after, strings of tadpole-like green seal characters emerged from the white bones. They floated in the air for a moment, and then flew into the space with Xiaohua's mind. They slowly revolved around reverse light. Thus, pieces of green seal characters and pictures were reflected in Xiaohua's mind. After the time of 2 meals, the green seal characters gradually dimmed and disappeared. Everything was stored in Xiaohua's mind. Alas, even with the ghost cultivator's inheritance, this young master still does not understand these green seal characters. Xiaohua sighed. Moreover, according to the ghost cultivator's inheritance, this talisman curse technique came from the immemorial witchcraft. It's just that it's much more shallow. I wonder when this young master will be able to understand these green seal characters? Thinking of the green seal characters, Xiaohua remembered the Confucian words on the tortoise shell. Those were the inscriptions on the armor, which also originated from the immemorial era. However, they were used by Confucian cultivators to record cultivation techniques. Looking at the vivid green seal characters, Xiaohua sighed again. He swept his mind again, and the 2 white bones flew into the space. Sure enough, once the white bones entered the space, ka-cha-cha, sounds of thunder could be heard. The white bones automatically flew to the bottom of the previous white bones and lay down. They looked just like the calf bones of a giant. This young master understands now. Seeing the invisible connection between the white bones and the green lightning wrapped around the white bones, Xiaohua smiled. This is the skeleton of an immemorial celestial. It's even related to lightning. If we can gather the skeleton of this celestial, maybe something fun will happen. As for what would be fun, Xiaohua scratched his head and couldn't think of anything. Below the white bones, the lightning beast cub seemed to still be in a deep slumber. The lightning ball on the white bones also wrapped around it. Moreover, from time to time, lightning would be born from the white clouds in the air, striking the lightning beast cub. No matter what, this little cub can live. Xiaohua smiled and looked at the poison beauty retaining grass. In this space, the beast poison seemed to have stopped, and the beauty retaining grass had a strong vitality. Although Xiaohua didn't expel the poison from the beauty retaining grass, the originally dead beauty retaining grass regained its vitality at this time. Moreover, it was fighting against the beast poison step by step. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't have time now, Xiaohua wouldn't dare to take the beauty retaining grass out of the space. He was afraid that the beast poison would wreak havoc again. If he didn't have the confidence to expel the poison, Xiaohua would definitely take the beauty retaining grass out of the space and see if he could use a secret method to save the beauty retaining grass. Thinking about it, which female cultivator wouldn't like a spiritual grass that could make a person stay young forever? Thinking about it again, even the burial flower manor only had 4 stalks. If he planted them in the space, then the spirit stones, Tiske, TSK, it wouldn't be any worse than a jade mine. Thinking about it, Xiaohua unconsciously licked his dry lips. It's better not to think too much. Xiaohua hurriedly pulled his consciousness out of the space and flipped through the ghost cultivator's inheritance. He carefully looked at the content of the shaman puppet and also looked at the details of the refining method of the shaman puppet. Oh, so this shaman puppet isn't omnipotent. The first time Xiaohua looked at it, he didn't look at it carefully. Now that he looked at it word by word, he understood some deeper things. The power of the shaman puppet is related to the cultivation of the person refining it. It should be able to resist the attack of a cultivator who is 1 level higher than that. If there is more, the shaman puppet can't replace it. And there's also the environment used, the magic tool used to kill it, and so on. The more Xiaohua looked, the smaller the surprise in his heart. But thinking about it, if the shaman puppet had such great power, it could directly replace the death of a cultivator. If the almighty cultivator refined a few more shaman puppets, then wouldn't they be able to rest easy? Even if it was lightning tribulation, they wouldn't have to be afraid. Lightning tribulation, magic tools that aren't part of the 5 elements. They can't be replaced by shaman puppets. Xiaohua looked and laughed. The requirements are getting more and more stringent. Oh, what are magic tools that aren't part of the 5 elements? Xiaohua suddenly paused and looked forward. His eyes turned, and he seemed to understand something. He thought to himself, in this inheritance, it only talks about magic tools. It doesn't talk about magic treasures or spirit treasures. It's probably because in ancient times, there were only magic tools. But after it reached the Dao sect, it started to divide them into different categories and increase the number of magic tools. However, I wonder what are magic tools that are part of the 5 elements? That's right, my great wisdom-heavy sword. Isn't it like this? Xiaohua suddenly came to a realization. Chapter 1999. When he thought about how he'd finally found the origin of the great wisdom sword, Xiaohua couldn't help but be overjoyed. He disregarded the refining of the shaman puppet and carefully looked through the inheritance of the ghost cultivators. After an hour, Xiaohua frowned and flicked his hand, taking out the great wisdom sword. The ghost cultivator's inheritance didn't say too much about magic tools that aren't part of the 5 elements. It only vaguely pointed out a few places. Xiaohua was a bit distressed. I only know that this kind of magic tool can't be refined using ordinary refining methods. It can't be contaminated with items of the 5 elements. Although the towering flame can be used to refine tools, it clearly belongs to the fire of the 5 elements. It definitely can't be used to refine the great wisdom sword. The true samadhi fire is too gentle and isn't suitable for refining tools. Could it be that I have to use that spiritual fire? But thinking about how using just a bit of spiritual fire would exhaust half of his cultivation, Xiaohua immediately became dejected. Damn it, if I want to refine the great wisdom sword, I'm afraid I'll have to use 10 times, or even 100 times my current cultivation. I really don't know when I'll be able to refine it. Moreover, what kind of magic tool can I refine with the great wisdom sword? Xiaohua's mind was active again. The great wisdom sword was originally a sword embryo. Presumably, it will be refined into a sword, but it can't be controlled by divine sense. So how can it fly? It can only be held in the hand. If it's held in the hand, how can it be used? I don't know any sword techniques that can be held in the hand. Usually, I only use it as a staff. After all, there's still a heavenly staff technique in my memories. Thinking here, Xiaohua raised his brows again, seeming to have thought of something. He had no choice but to dig out the ghost cultivator's inheritance again. There was no other reason. The ghost cultivator's inheritance was really too much. It wasn't Xiaohua's own memories. When he used it, he could only find it on the spot. After a moment, a trace of a smile appeared on Xiao Hua's face. He opened his eyes and said with a smile, "5 elements, wishful heavenly staff. Isn't this the weapon you prepared for me?" It turned out that in the ghost cultivator's inheritance, there was a staff-shaped magic tool used by immemorial celestials. Its size could be controlled by the heart, and it didn't belong to the 5 elements. Moreover, it was shockingly heavy. Wasn't this the staff that Xiao Hua was thinking? It's a pity that the inheritance only recorded this kind of magic weapon. It didn't record how to refine it or what materials were used to refine it. Xiao Hua scratched his chin with his index finger and said with a smile, "Presumably, with the spiritual bodies of ghosts, they're also afraid of this 5 elements wishful heaven cudgel. Even if they knew, they wouldn't dare to record it down. Forget it, a celestial being's magical artifact isn't something I've seen before. Who knows, it might even be a primordial forging technique. That's something that only almighty beings possess. I'd better not covet it." Thinking about this, Xiao Hua was somewhat happy and somewhat melancholy as he put away the Great Wisdom Sword. With a wave of his hand, the Great Wisdom Sword was held in his hand. Immediately, he closed his eyes and carefully went through the method of refining the Great Wisdom Sword. Then he used his thumb to point at the mark of the Great Wisdom eye on his forehead and shouted, "Open!" As Xiao Hua spat out the needle eye, the mark of the Great Wisdom eye between his eyebrows gradually appeared. After waiting for a moment, Xiao Hua closed his eyes and urged the soul cultivation technique. The soul strands extended out from the Great Wisdom eye. Thread by thread, circle by circle, they wrapped around the Great Wisdom Sword according to the method of refining the Great Wisdom Sword. Following the strange, winding method of the soul strands, the green seal characters on the Great Wisdom Sword began to slowly appear. One by one, they lit up as if Xiao Hua was lighting them up one after another. When all the green seal characters lit up, Xiao Hua's soul strands began to fling out again. Each strand of soul strands touched a green seal character. Xiao Hua only felt the place where his soul strands were connected to tremble. For some reason, there was an indescribable feeling of comfort, or perhaps it was a strange feeling. It was as if he had somewhat understood the meaning of the green seal characters. But if he were to say it out loud, it would be extremely difficult. Understand. Xiao Hua was overjoyed. So this is how the green seal characters are practiced. It's definitely not the Great Wisdom Sword or the Great Wisdom Sword. The green seal characters themselves have the ability to shock the heavens and make ghosts and gods weep. So that's how it is. While thinking, Xiao Hua carefully pulled out his soul strands again. One by one, he touched all the green seal characters. However, what surprised him was that although there were many green seal characters, there were only 3 that could cause his soul to tremble. Could it be? Xiao Hua, while arranging the green seal characters according to the records, secretly guessed. There are only 3 useful green seal characters, and the green seal characters are all formed by these 3 green seal characters? Or perhaps, I can feel these 3 green seal characters, but I can't feel the others? Just as he was thinking about it, all of the green seal characters had finished assembling and were floating in the air, forming a slightly larger green seal character. It should be like this. Looking at this green seal character that was extremely similar to the other green seal characters, Xiao Hua thought to himself. Then, without hesitation, he opened his mouth and spat a mouthful of essence blood on the green seal character. The green seal character suddenly emitted a brilliant golden light. Then, Xiao Hua only felt a slight dizziness in his head. The green seal character returned to its faint green appearance and completely covered the shaman puppet. As the green seal text fell, the entire shaman puppet also emitted a green light, which disappeared in a flash. Although the shaman puppet's appearance didn't change, Xiao Hua could clearly see that the shaman puppet's mouth was curled up, revealing a slight smile. Seeing this smile, Xiao Hua's face also revealed a smile. The shaman puppet couldn't be used infinitely. Each shaman puppet could only be used 3 times. Since Xiao Hua succeeded in refining it and revealed a smiling face, it meant that the shaman puppet could still be used. The crying face from before must be the reason that Cultivator didn't know how to refine it. And I wonder who that Cultivator is. His storage bag isn't at his waist. Xiao Hua smiled and thought. Presumably, everything in his storage bag has become the prey of others in the future. After refining the voodoo puppet, Xiao Hua also found a silk ribbon and hung the voodoo puppet in front of his neck, placing it together with the phoenix auspicious jade talisman. Then he slightly released his Buddhist consciousness to observe the Mo Bao outside the formation. Just as Xiao Hua expected, the Mo Bao outside the formation was still rampant and showed no signs of stopping. Fine, then I'll use this free time to cultivate more. Xiao Hua didn't regret it. What he lacked now was time. Wasn't it good to have free time? Immediately, Xiao Hua closed his eyes and comprehended the mysteries of the soul spike. That ghost cultivator's soul spike was indeed powerful. It directly pierced into the Naiwan Palace. It was definitely the nemesis of divine sense. Previously, when Xiao Hua killed the short and fat cultivator, he also didn't expect it to be so powerful. He even prepared the dream execution, true, samadhi fire, and a few other moves. However, once the soul spike was used, it immediately showed a miraculous effect. All of the other moves were useless. Therefore, Xiao Hua very much liked this method that could restrain a Jindan cultivator's divine ability. That you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.